She stood in that courtroom like she'd already won. Tailored blazer, designer heels, a legal team that cost more per hour than most people earned in a month. Victoria Reed had built her entire case on one simple assumption, that the man sitting across from her was nobody. A mechanic, a struggling single dad, a man who fixed other people's machines because he couldn't fix his own life. She was so certain. And then the documents hit the table, and the room went quiet in a way that made even the judge stop breathing. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew everything about you, stay with me. Drop your city in the comments and let me know how far this story travels. Like, subscribe, and let's begin. The morning Victoria told him she wanted a divorce, Logan Carter was underneath a 1987 Ford F250 with grease on his forearms and a wrench in his hand. She had stood at the entrance to the garage. Their garage, technically, though she rarely came in here. Wearing her work clothes already, heels on the concrete floor, coffee in hand, and she'd said it the way you might tell someone you're canceling a dentist appointment. Matter of fact. Slightly inconvenienced. Already thinking about what came next. I want to separate, Logan. I've had a lawyer draw up the preliminary paperwork. I think it's the right move for both of us. He'd heard her voice. He'd heard the words. He didn't move for a long moment, just lay there in the quiet under the belly of that old truck, staring up at the differential housing, listening to the sound of oil dripping somewhere it shouldn't be. Then he'd rolled out on the creeper, sat up, and looked at her. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look sad. She looked like a woman who had made a decision and was ready to move on to the next item on her agenda. Okay, he said. That was all. She blinked, clearly expected more. An argument, maybe. Tears. Something she could use. Okay? She repeated. Yeah. He stood up, wiped his hands on a shop rag. Let me know what you need from me. She stared at him for another second, something unreadable crossing her face. And then she nodded once, sharp and efficient, and walked back inside. The door clicked shut behind her. Logan looked down at the rag in his hands, squeezed it once. Then he went back to work. That was 3 months ago. Now it was late October in Nashville, and the trees along the edge of their property, his property now, since Victoria had moved into a downtown apartment better suited to the lifestyle she was building, had gone red and gold the way Tennessee trees did every fall, like they were putting on a show for no one in particular. Logan was standing at the kitchen counter at 6:15 in the morning, making lunches. 2 sandwiches, one with the crust cut off because Owen still refused to eat them, even though he was 7 years old and Logan had been told by at least 3 different people that kids grew out of that. Owen had not grown out of it. Logan had accepted this. He could hear his son upstairs, the particular chaos of a 7-year-old getting ready for school, which involved approximately 45 minutes of effort compressed into 12 minutes of actual productivity and a great deal of noise that Logan had learned to parse like a language. Drawers opening, shoes hitting the floor. The sound of Owen talking to himself, which he did constantly, and which Logan found oddly comforting. Dad. Owen appeared at the top of the stairs, one sneaker on, the other in his hand. Where's my other sock? You're holding your shoe. I know I'm holding my shoe. Where's the sock? Kitchen table. I put your laundry out last night. Oh. A pause. Why is it on the table? Because I ran out of hands. Owen considered this for a moment with the particular gravity that 7-year-olds brought to logistical questions. Then he disappeared back upstairs and Logan could hear him pulling things around. He finished packing the lunch boxes, checked the coffee maker, poured a mug. Outside the kitchen window, the backyard was gray in the early light, a bird feeder. Logan had put up in September, one of Owen's projects, had attracted exactly 2 birds so far, both of them the same species of large, bossy blue jay that Owen had named Gerald. Logan watched Gerald eat seed and thought about the divorce paperwork sitting in a folder on his desk. He wasn't angry about it. People assumed he must be his neighbor Dale Hutchins, who'd been divorced twice himself and considered this sufficient expertise to counsel others, had sat on Logan's porch for 3 hours one evening offering a combination of sympathy and barely concealed satisfaction. I always thought she looked down on you, buddy. Too good for us regular folks. Logan had drunk his beer and listened and said very little, which Dale interpreted as devastation. It wasn't devastation. It was something quieter and more complicated. The particular grief of watching something end that you'd wanted to work, knowing that wanting it wasn't enough, and that the gap between who Victoria had become and who she'd needed him to be had grown too wide to cross. He'd tried, for a while. He knew that. He'd also known, for a while, that trying wasn't going to be enough. Logan Carter had grown up in two worlds simultaneously, which meant he'd never fully belonged to either one. His father, James Carter, had built an aviation company from the bones of a small regional charter service into something considerably larger and more complicated, Carter Aviation Holdings, which by the time Logan was 15 had expanded to include aircraft leasing, maintenance, and repair operations, a small regional airline partnership, and a network of private terminals across the Southeast. James Carter had been, by any objective measure, a wealthy and powerful man. He was also a man who drove a pickup truck and fixed things himself when they broke, and believed, with a conviction that bordered on religious, that money was a tool and not a personality, and that the worst thing that could happen to a child was to grow up thinking their worth was determined by their net worth. So Logan had gone to public school. He'd learned to work on engines at 14 because James made him. He'd spent summers doing actual labor at the maintenance facilities, not tours, not observation, but work. So he understood what it meant to build something with your hands before he understood the paperwork required to own it. The people who work for you, James had told him once, when Logan was maybe 16, both of them elbow deep in the engine of a company shuttle van that had developed a persistent miss at idle. They'll know in 30 seconds whether you're real or you're performing. And you can't learn to be real by pretending. You have to actually be it. Logan had been real. He'd made sure of that. When James died, a cardiac event, unexpected on a Tuesday morning in his office when Logan was 24, the inheritance had been structured through a trust so complex it required 2 attorneys and a financial firm to administer. Logan had become sole owner and trustee of Carter Aviation Holdings, along with every affiliated company, every parcel of land, every aircraft, every partnership agreement. He'd also, without telling almost anyone, continued to live exactly as he had before. This was not deception. Or it wasn't only deception. It was partly grief, the need to stay connected to the life his father had built and the values he'd built it on. It was partly the recognition, sharp and accurate, that money changed how people related to you in ways that weren't always improvements. It was partly the fact that Logan was, at his core, more comfortable with a wrench in his hand than with a boardroom full of people performing ambition at each other. And it was partly, he admitted to himself on his honest days, something protective, a caution he'd developed young, a preference for knowing that when someone liked him, they liked him, and not the things attached to him. He told Victoria once, early on, not everything, not the scope of it, but enough. He'd mentioned the family business. She'd half listened, distracted by something on her phone, and moved on to other topics, and Logan had let it go. Later, much later, he would wonder if that had been a mistake. What? Victoria Reed had not grown up wealthy. This was relevant. She'd grown up in a mid-sized house in Brentwood with parents who were comfortable but stretched. A father in insurance, a mother who taught elementary school, both of them decent people who worried about money in the low-grade chronic way that left a mark on their daughter that took years to identify and longer to understand. Victoria had been smart, genuinely, usefully smart, not just sharp, but strategic, able to see 3 steps ahead in a negotiation, able to read rooms and calibrate herself to what they required. She'd put herself through college, gotten her MBA on a partial scholarship, and entered the real estate industry at 23 with a clear understanding of where she wanted to go and a realistic assessment of how to get there. She and Logan had met at 26, at a party thrown by a mutual friend, one of those Nashville parties where the guest list mixed industry people and creative types, and a few outliers who'd ended up there by accident. Logan had been one of the outliers, there because he'd helped the host install a sound system and stayed when they'd offered him a beer. Victoria had been circulating, doing what she did at parties, building connections. She'd ended up in a corner conversation with Logan that had lasted 2 hours and covered, as she'd told her friend afterward, approximately everything. "He's interesting," she'd said, in a tone that meant she hadn't expected that. He was. He was the most unperformative person she'd ever met. Not trying to impress her, not trying to close any particular deal, just present and honest and occasionally funny in a way that snuck up on you. She'd found it refreshing in a way she hadn't been able to articulate at the time. What she hadn't been able to see at the time was that she'd also found it temporary. Not consciously, not as a plan, but somewhere under everything else she had absorbed the idea. From the world she was building herself into, from the people she admired, from the constant comparison that social media and professional ambition combined to make inescapable, that what she needed eventually was someone who matched her trajectory. Someone with a title, a reputation, a visible presence in the world. Someone who showed up in the same room she did. Logan didn't do that. Logan showed up in garages and at school pickups and at the hardware store and at Owen's soccer games. Logan showed up exactly where he said he would be, every time, without exception, and never anywhere more glamorous than that. For a while, this had been enough. Then it had started to feel like a ceiling. Damian Brooks came into Victoria's professional life 2 years before the divorce, when her company, Reed Properties Group, which she'd built from a 3-person office into a regional player with 12 employees and an expanding portfolio, brought him in as an outside consultant. He was 41, polished in the particular way of men who'd spent decades curating their polish. He had the kind of appearance that photographs well and the kind of conversation that made you feel, while you were in it, that you were the most interesting person in the room. He dressed like someone who charged $400 an hour and wanted you to know it. Within 6 months of working together, he had become one of the people Victoria called when she had a decision to make. Logan noticed. He didn't say much about it. That wasn't his style. But he noticed. The name came up more often. The late evenings extended. Victoria's dissatisfaction with her own life became more articulate, more specific, more pointed in his direction. You don't have ambition, Logan. You could be doing so much more with your life. Don't you ever want something bigger than this? He tried, on a few different occasions, to have a real conversation about it. Those conversations had not gone well. Victoria by then was already in the process of reassembling her understanding of her own history, editing herself into the protagonist of a story about a woman who'd been held back, rather than a woman who'd chosen poorly and then chosen to revise the story. Logan hadn't fit the role she needed him to play in that story, so she'd rewritten him. Whoosh. Evelyn Grant had known James Carter for 30 years, and Logan for his entire life. She was 63, small and precise, with silver hair. She wore short and reading glasses she kept on a chain around her neck, and a mind that Logan had come to trust more than almost any other instrument in his life. She'd been his father's chief advisor, officially his executive administrator, which was a significant understatement, and after James died, she'd continued in that role for the trust, managing the administrative complexity of the Carter holdings with a thoroughness that had, on multiple occasions, saved Logan from consequences he hadn't seen coming. She also knew, better than anyone, that Logan had inherited his father's habit of trusting people before he verified them. "You know what's worrying me?" she said. They were sitting in her office, not at the company headquarters, which was housed in a building in Franklin that Logan visited maybe 3 times a month, but in her home office, which was where she preferred to work, and which was, Logan had learned over the years, where she said the things that mattered. "Tell me," Logan said. "Damian Brooks." Logan set down his coffee. "I know the name." "I know you know the name. What do you know about the man?" "Business consultant. Works with high-end clients in commercial real estate and development. Runs in circles Victoria has been building toward." He paused. "They're close. They're closer than professional." Evelyn removed her glasses, set them on the desk, her particular signal that what came next was important. "I've had someone looking into him, quietly, for about 4 months." "Okay." Damian Brooks is a partner, unofficial, carefully hidden, in an investment group called Meridian Capital Advisors. They've been active in the Southeast aviation sector for the last decade. They've made 3 attempts to acquire or gain controlling influence in Carter Aviation Holdings. Logan was very still. "I know about the acquisition attempts. We declined all 3. "Yes, and after the 3rd, about 6 years ago, the direct approach stopped." Evelyn folded her hands on the desk. "What I didn't know until recently was that it wasn't abandoned. It evolved. They started looking for other points of entry, indirect influence, personal relationships. The silence that followed had weight to it. "How long has Brooks been working with Victoria?" Logan asked, though he already knew. He was introduced to her through an industry event in 2021. The consulting arrangement came 8 months later. His contact with her company predates the official consulting relationship by almost a year. He was in her orbit well before she hired him. Logan looked at the window. Outside, November rain was starting, the kind that came in sideways in Tennessee. "She doesn't know," he said. It wasn't a question. Almost certainly not. She would have no reason to look for it, and he'd have taken care not to be findable. Evelyn's voice was careful, neutral in the way she got when she was managing her own reaction to something. "She's being used, Logan. I want to be clear about that. Whatever her motivations for leaving the marriage, Brooks has been working on those motivations deliberately." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because she's filed for full custody of Owen." He turned back from the window. "The petition came through her attorney's office 2 days ago," Evelyn said. "It names you as financially inadequate and professionally unestablished. It argues that Owen would have better opportunities in Victoria's custody." Logan said nothing for a long moment. "She's going to use your lifestyle against you," Evelyn said gently. "The truck, the shop, the way you've chosen to live. Her attorney will argue that Owen deserves a parent who can provide more." "And Brooks?" "He'll stay behind the curtain. He won't appear in any of this directly, but I'd be willing to bet the custody filing wasn't Victoria's idea alone." Logan stood up, walked to the window. The rain was coming harder now, streaking down the glass in thin lines. He thought about Owen that morning. The sock, Gerald the Blue Jay, the peanut butter sandwich with the crusts cut off. The way his son had climbed into the truck without being asked, and immediately started telling him about something that had happened at school, gesturing with both hands the way he did when he was really into a story, not even pausing to check if Logan was listening because Owen had never had to check. He just knew. "I'm not going to lose him," Logan said. "No," Evelyn said. "You're not." Okay. Victoria's apartment was on the 14th floor of a building in the Gulch neighborhood, all glass and clean lines and a view of the Nashville skyline that looked especially good at night. She'd chosen it partly for the view, partly for the address, partly because it was the kind of place that said something about who she was becoming. She liked it here. She liked the feeling of it, the forward motion, the sense of a life she was building correctly this time, on foundations that matched her ambitions rather than apologizing for them. Damien came over on Thursday evenings. It hadn't been officially defined, they hadn't had that conversation, but the pattern had established itself naturally over the past few months, ever since the separation. He would bring wine, usually, something from a place he'd been that week. He would ask about her work with the particular attention that made her feel seen in a way she'd started to realize she'd been craving for a long time. He never pushed. That was one of the things she'd noticed about him. He never pushed. He asked questions and let her arrive at conclusions that seemed, each time, like her own. "How did the meeting with your attorney go?" he asked one evening, settled on her couch with a glass of something red. "Good. She's confident about the custody petition." Victoria stood at the window, looking at the city. "Logan won't contest it, I think. He's not confrontational." "What about his situation? Financially?" "He works at a shop, does some consulting, allegedly, though I've never seen documentation of anything substantial." She shook her head. "He's never been ambitious. You know this. I've talked about it." "I do know." Damien's voice was thoughtful, measured. "I just want to make sure you're going into this with clear eyes. If there's anything about his situation you're not fully aware of." "There's nothing," she said it firmly. "I lived with the man for 6 years. I know what his life looks like." Damien nodded slowly. Let the silence hold. "Owen deserves stability," Victoria said to herself as much as to him. "Real stability, the kind I can actually provide now." "Of course," Damien said. He picked up his wine glass. He did not add anything else. He didn't need to. Guan. Owen Carter was 7 years and 4 months old, and he had his father's eyes and his mother's cheekbones and a gap between his front teeth that his dentist said would close on its own, and his pediatrician said would close on its own, and which Owen had decided was fine because it helped him whistle. He was, Logan had come to understand, Not a complicated kid, but a perceptive one. He'd processed his parents' separation with a 7-year-old's version of pragmatism, asking specific, logistical questions, accepting the answers, adjusting his sense of normal. He missed having both of them in the same house. He said so directly, which was one of the things about Owen that made Logan's chest do complicated things. His son didn't dress things up. "Do you miss Mom?" Owen had asked one evening, about a month in. They'd been doing the dishes together, which was their system. Logan washed, Owen dried, or in practice, Owen stood next to Logan holding a dish towel and asking questions while Logan washed and dried. "Yeah," Logan said. "I do." "She seems different now. People change. That's real." "Do you think she changed, or do you think she was always this way and just stopped pretending?" Logan had stopped washing, looked at his son. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Owen shrugged. "I heard you say something like it on the phone, to Evelyn." Logan made a mental note about the acoustics of their house. "That's a grown-up question." "I'm asking." "I think," Logan said carefully, "that people are usually a mix of who they actually are and who they're trying to be. And sometimes those two things get further apart. And sometimes one wins." Owen considered this with great seriousness. "Which one won with Mom?" "I don't know yet," Logan said honestly. "We'll see." Owen went back to not drying a plate. "I like living here," he said after a while. "I like our house." "Good," Logan said. "Me too." The custody petition came with 14 pages of supporting documentation. Logan sat at his kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and read through all of it, and he did not get angry, which surprised him a little. He'd expected to get angry. Instead, he felt something like clarity, the sensation of a situation revealing its actual shape after existing in fog. Victoria's legal team had done their work. The filing argued, systematically and with supporting citations, that Logan Carter was a man without professional establishment, without documented income sufficient to provide Owen with the educational and developmental opportunities available through his mother's custody, and without the social and professional networks that would position Owen well as he grew. They'd done a search of public records. They'd found the shop, the truck, the utility accounts in Logan's name, the address on the rural edge of Davidson County. They'd found nothing else because everything else was structured through entities that didn't connect, publicly, to his name. He called Evelyn at 9 o'clock that night. "I read it," he said. "And? I want to be careful about how we respond." "Careful how?" "I don't want to turn this into a war. Victoria..." He stopped. Started again. "She's been manipulated. I don't think she fully knows that. Whatever's happening with Brooks, she believes what she believes about me because she's been guided to believe it." "Logan?" Evelyn's voice was patient but direct. "She's filing for custody of your son." "I know that." "The time for being careful about Victoria's feelings is, I'm not protecting her feelings. I'm protecting Owen from watching his parents destroy each other in a courtroom." He stood up, moved to the window. "There's a difference." A long pause on the line. "What do you want to do?" Evelyn asked. "Respond to the petition, fully. Document everything. Let the facts do what they're going to do." He looked out at the dark yard, at the bird feeder barely visible in the security light. "But I want to be smart about it. I want Brooks exposed in a way that Victoria can't dismiss or explain away. Not because I want to punish her, because if she's going to understand what happened, she needs to see all of it. And if she doesn't understand it, that's her choice to make." He paused. "My job is Owen." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then, "I'll get the attorney started. Full disclosure package, the trust documents, the holding summary, the Meridian Capital documentation, everything." "Everything," Logan confirmed. "This is going to change things." "I know." "Are you ready for that?" Logan thought about his son upstairs, asleep in the room they'd painted together 2 years ago. Owen had picked the color, a particular shade of blue he'd seen somewhere and declared non-negotiable. He thought about Gerald the blue jay eating seed in the gray Tennessee morning. He thought about a girl in a blue room and a gap in her teeth, and the particular way a 7-year-old reached for your hand in a parking lot without thinking about it, just reached because the hand was there. "Yeah," he said. "I'm ready." What? The weeks between the filing and the hearing moved differently than Logan expected. Not slowly. He'd expected slow, the grinding weight of legal process, but in bursts, some calm and some not. He kept the routine tight. School drop-off at 7:40, work at the shop from 8 to 3:30, pick up at 4. Dinner together, dishes, homework on the kitchen table, while Logan sat nearby doing his own version of paperwork. Though not the kind he kept here, not the shop receipts and invoices and parts orders that lived in a folder by the door, but the other kind, the documents that Evelyn sent in encrypted files and that he reviewed on a laptop he kept in his bedroom. Carter Aviation Holdings had, in the past fiscal year, generated revenues that would have looked absurd in the context of this house, this truck, this life. Logan reviewed the numbers with the same methodical attention he brought to everything, and then he closed the laptop and went to help Owen with a worksheet on Tennessee geography. Nashville's the capital, Owen said, not looking up from the paper. Good. Memphis is bigger, but Nashville is the capital. Also good. Why isn't the capital the biggest city? Historical reasons mostly. Ask me when you're older and I'll give you the complicated answer. Owen looked up. I'm old enough. You're old enough to want the answer. That's different. Owen made a face that communicated eloquently his opinion of this distinction and went back to his worksheet. Logan sat with his coffee and watched his son work and felt underneath everything, underneath the legal machinery grinding into motion, underneath the document preparation and the strategy calls with Evelyn's attorneys and the particular dull awareness that his life was about to be substantially rearranged, something that was almost peace. Not happiness exactly, not certainty, just the bedrock knowledge of where he stood and why and what he was standing for. That, his father had told him once, was all you could ever actually know. The rest was just weather. Victoria's attorney was named Patricia Holt, and she was very good. Logan had read her background after seeing her name on the filing. 15 years of family law, primarily representing executives and high net worth individuals in contested custody cases. Her record was strong. She knew how to frame a narrative, how to use financial documentation and lifestyle evidence to build a picture for a judge that was difficult to argue against. She'd built a good picture with Logan. The problem Patricia Holt did not yet know she had, was that the picture was based on a selective set of facts, and the full set of facts looked considerably different. Logan met with Evelyn's legal team twice in the weeks before the hearing. They were a group of 3, a family law specialist brought in specifically for the custody matter, a corporate attorney who knew the trust structure inside and out, and a younger associate who handled the document assembly with a completeness that Logan found reassuring. How much do we reveal at the hearing? He asked at the second meeting. All of it, the family law attorney, a woman named Sandra Voss, said flatly. We don't drip feed. We don't create suspense. We present the complete picture at once, in organized form, and we let Victoria's team respond to what they actually have rather than what they thought they had. The Meridian Capital connection goes in the package, documented, not speculative. Sandra looked at him steadily. I want to be honest with you about something, Mr. Carter. This is going to be uncomfortable, for you and for her. The full disclosure will include documentation that makes her look, at minimum, naive, and at maximum, like someone who was being used as an instrument in a corporate play. She's not going to take that well. I know. Okay. Sandra gathered her papers. Then we're ready. On the night before the hearing, Logan sat on the back porch until almost midnight. The temperature had dropped. Nashville in November did that, swung between almost warm and genuinely cold within a few days. And he had his jacket on and a mug that had been coffee an hour ago and was now just something to hold. He thought about the day he and Victoria had moved into this house. Owen had been too, still unsteady on his feet, deeply fascinated by the paint swatches they'd taped to the walls. He'd walked from room to room, touching each one with one finger, very seriously, making a sound that might have been assessment. Victoria had laughed that day, real laughing, not the cultivated version she'd developed for professional events, actual, unguarded laughter. She'd picked Owen up and carried him from swatch to swatch on her hip, narrating the colors. That woman was real. Logan had known her. He'd loved her. He'd also known, for the last 2 years at least, that she was losing herself to something. Ambition and comparison and the voice of someone who'd spent those 2 years carefully directing her toward conclusions that served his purposes. He didn't hate her for it. He wasn't sure he could, even if he tried. But he also wasn't going to let that sympathy cost him his son. He finished what was left in the mug. Cold. He made a face. Tomorrow was going to be long. He went inside, checked the locks, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. Paused outside Owen's door, which was cracked open the way Owen still insisted on having it. His son was asleep on his side, one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress the way he'd always slept, even as a baby. Logan stood in the doorway and looked at him for a moment. Then he went to bed and slept better than he'd expected. The courthouse on 2nd Avenue North was not an impressive building from the outside. Logan had driven past it 100 times over the years without ever thinking much about it. Just another piece of Nashville's civic infrastructure, brick and glass. Unremarkable. Now, pulling into the parking garage at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning with his attorney in the passenger seat, he found himself studying it differently. Sandra Voss was reviewing notes on a legal pad balanced on her knee, pen moving in quick, decisive strokes. She'd been up since 5, she'd mentioned when he picked her up, which Logan had already known because she'd sent him 2 emails before 6. He'd read them in the kitchen while Owen ate cereal, and then he'd gotten his son into the car, dropped him at his aunt's house, Logan's older sister, Kara, who'd driven down from Gallatin the night before without being asked, because that was who Kara was, and driven across town in the gray November morning. "You doing okay?" Sandra asked, without looking up from her notes. "Yeah. You don't have to do anything today except sit there and be exactly who you are." She turned a page. "That's actually the strategy. Don't perform. Don't try to look a particular way. Just be you." "I've been doing that my whole life. It's how I ended up in this situation." She looked up at that, studied him for a second. Then, unexpectedly, she almost smiled. "Fair point. Be you, but in a courtroom." Reassuring? "It's the best I've got before 8:30. She went back to her notes. "Patricia Holt is going to open hard. She's built a clean narrative and she's going to sell it. Let her. Let her finish. Don't react visibly to anything she says, even when it's wrong, especially when it's wrong. Our response is the document package, and that package is going to do more work than anything either of us can say." Logan nodded. He pulled into a space, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the quiet. He thought about something Owen had said at breakfast that morning, at Kara's kitchen table, spooning cereal and watching cartoons with his cousins. Logan had come to say goodbye before heading to the courthouse, crouching down next to Owen's chair. "You're going to the thing today?" Owen had asked. "Yeah, bud." "The court thing?" "Yeah." Owen had looked at him with that particular expression, the one that meant he was processing something he didn't fully have the language for. "Are you going to win?" "I'm going to tell the truth," Logan said. "That's what I'm going to do." Owen considered this. "That's not the same as winning." "No," Logan agreed, "but it's the part I can control." Owen nodded slowly, like this was satisfactory. Then, "Don't forget I have soccer on Thursday." "I know about soccer. And we're out of the good granola bars. I'll get more. The chocolate chip ones, not the honey ones." "Owen. Just making sure." Logan had hugged him, his son gone stiff and accommodating for exactly 2 seconds before wriggling away, the precise amount of affection a 7-year-old would tolerate in front of cousins. And then he'd walked out to the car and driven toward the courthouse with the window down, even though it was cold, needing the air. Now he got out of the car, straightened his jacket, and followed Sandra toward the entrance. Inside, he saw Victoria before she saw him. She was standing near the elevator bank with Patricia Holt and a younger associate, all 3 of them in a tight cluster, speaking in low voices. Victoria had her hair up, wore a dark blazer over a silk blouse, dressed for the role she was playing today, which was successful CEO, responsible mother, woman of substance. She looked good. She looked confident. She looked like someone who had already written the ending. Then she turned and saw him. Something moved across her face, hard to name, gone too quickly to read. They looked at each other across the lobby for maybe 3 seconds. Then she turned back to her attorneys. Logan walked to the elevator. He didn't look back. The courtroom was smaller than he'd expected. Judge Marion Caldwell was a compact woman in her late 50s who had the bearing of someone who had heard over a long career every possible version of every possible story and had no patience for theatrics. She'd been on the family court bench for 11 years. Sandra had briefed him. Caldwell was known for being methodical, fair to a fault, and deeply unimpressed by either wealth or performance. That last part, Sandra had noted with emphasis, was relevant. Patricia Holt opened with precision. She laid out Victoria's case cleanly, not with hostility, but with the confident efficiency of someone presenting a clear argument to a reasonable audience. Victoria Reed had built, from nothing, a significant professional enterprise. She had financial stability, a professional network, a home environment in a well-resourced neighborhood. She could provide Owen with private school options, with enrichment opportunities, with the kind of material foundation that set children up for futures. Logan Carter, by contrast. And here Patricia's tone remained carefully neutral, because she was smart enough to know that attacking a quiet man too hard made court sympathetic to him, had made choices that reflected a different set of priorities. A skilled laborer, respected in his community, but without the professional infrastructure or documented financial standing to match what Victoria could offer. This was not, Patricia emphasized, a reflection on his character. It was simply a question of capacity. The word capacity landed in the courtroom with the particular weight of things said in careful language that mean harder things. Logan kept his face even. Beside him, Sandra wrote something on her legal pad and underlined it twice. Victoria took the stand first. She was composed, genuinely composed, not performing calm, actually possessing it, which Logan noticed because he'd spent 6 years learning the difference. She answered Patricia's questions in a clear, organized way, laying out her financial situation, her home, her vision for Owen's future. She spoke about the divorce with measured sadness, not bitterness. She was careful not to attack Logan directly, letting the structural argument do that work instead. Patricia walked her through the exhibits, bank statements, income documentation, a portfolio of Victoria's professional achievements that was, Logan admitted internally, genuinely impressive. She'd built something real. He'd never disputed that. And in your view, Patricia said, what is the primary reason you're seeking full custody at this time? Victoria paused, just slightly, in a way that looked like authentic reflection. I want Owen to have every opportunity, every door open. I love his father. I think Logan is a good man. She looked briefly toward Logan's side of the room. But I think I can give our son things that Logan, given where he is in his life, simply can't. It was a good answer, generous in tone, devastating in content. Then Sandra rose. She began quietly, which Holt's team clearly hadn't expected. No counter-argument, no challenge to Victoria's financial narrative. Instead, she made a request of the court to admit a series of documents into evidence which she'd submitted prior to the hearing. Patricia looked mildly curious. She'd done her discovery work. She knew what Logan's documentation looked like, or she thought she did. The documents being submitted, Sandra said, addressing Judge Caldwell, constitute a complete financial and legal disclosure of Mr. Carter's holdings, personal and corporate. They include trust documents, corporate records, asset summaries, and affiliated documentation that we believe is directly material to the court's assessment of this matter. Caldwell looked at the stack of documents her clerk set before her, a substantial stack. Counsel for petitioner, Caldwell said, glancing at Patricia. Has your team reviewed these materials? We've reviewed Mr. Carter's disclosed financial information, Your Honor. Yes. These were submitted yesterday afternoon, Sandra said pleasantly. They represent a more complete disclosure than what was available in prior discovery. Patricia's composure remained intact, but something shifted slightly behind her eyes. Your Honor, I'd request a recess to review any new submissions. The submissions were filed within the timeline permitted by the court's scheduling order, Sandra said, still pleasant. We're happy to walk through them systematically. Caldwell considered. We'll proceed. Counsel can request additional time to respond if the materials warrant it. And then Sandra began to walk through the documents. It took 40 minutes. Logan sat and watched it happen. The careful, methodical unpacking of a life he'd kept mostly private, laid out now in public with the particular clarity of legal documentation. Sandra didn't editorialize. She didn't dramatize. She simply presented, one document at a time, the actual shape of Logan Carter's existence. The trust established by James Carter in 2011, naming Logan as sole trustee and primary beneficiary. The corporate filing records for Carter Aviation Holdings, with Logan listed as owner. The consolidated balance sheet, aircraft fleet valuations, real property, operational subsidiaries, partnership interests, adding to a total that, when Sandra read it aloud, caused an audible shift in the atmosphere of the courtroom. Victoria went very still. Logan watched it happen from across the room, watched her face process what she was hearing, the confusion first, then the arithmetic, then the full comprehension arriving like something falling from a height. She looked at the documents. She looked at Logan. She looked back at the documents. Patricia Holt leaned toward her client, said something low. Victoria shook her head, almost imperceptibly. The gesture of a person who has just discovered the map they've been using doesn't match the terrain. Additionally, Sandra continued, her voice unchanged, we're submitting documentation regarding a corporate entity called Meridian Capital Advisors and its relationship to certain individuals who have been present in the petitioner's professional and personal circle. This was when Damian Brooks, seated 3 rows back in the gallery. Logan had clocked him when he came in, sat in the back like an observer, confident in his invisibility. Went very quiet in a way that was different from the quiet he'd been maintaining before. The shift was subtle. Logan caught it. He'd been watching for it. Sandra laid out the Meridian documentation the same way she'd laid out everything else. Clean, sequential, without commentary. The investment group, its history of acquisition attempts targeting Carter Aviation Holdings, the documented relationship between Damian Brooks and Meridian's principal partners, the timeline of Brooks's introduction into Victoria's professional network. She did not say he was using you. She didn't need to. The timeline said it. The document said it. The 3 failed acquisition attempts, and then the sudden appearance of a polished consultant in the orbit of the woman married to the company's owner. It said everything that needed saying. Victoria's face had gone through several different things during this section of Sandra's presentation. Logan watched, not to take satisfaction in it, but because he felt he owed her that witness. Whatever she was working through, he wasn't going to look away from it. She looked, in the end, less angry than he'd expected. She looked stunned. And underneath the stunned, if he was reading her right, something that was beginning to look a lot like humiliation. Not because of the courtroom or the judge or Logan across the room, because of what she was beginning to understand about the last 2 years of her life. Your Honor, Sandra said, gathering her papers with a composure that Logan appreciated, the documentation presented today establishes that Mr. Carter possesses substantially greater financial resources and professional standing than the petitioner's filing assumed. It also raises serious questions about the motivations of individuals who may have influenced the petitioner's decision to pursue this action. Mr. Carter is not seeking to condemn the petitioner. He is seeking to ensure that this court has the complete picture before making any determination regarding his son. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Caldwell spent a long moment reviewing documents, the scratch of her pen, the rustle of pages. Somewhere in the gallery, someone shifted in a chair. We'll take a 30-minute recess, Caldwell said finally. Her voice gave nothing away. The gavel came down and the room began to move, and Logan sat exactly where he was. Sandra put a hand briefly on his arm. Not celebration, just acknowledgement. And then she was gathering papers, efficient and focused. Patricia Holt was already in low, urgent conversation with Victoria. From where he sat, Logan couldn't hear the words, but he could read the posture. The attorney recalibrating, the client trying to hold herself together. He made himself not watch that too long. That part wasn't his business. He looked instead toward the back of the courtroom. The spot where Damian Brooks had been sitting was empty. At some point in the last few minutes, Logan hadn't caught the exact moment, he'd slipped out. Logan had expected that. Men like that knew when to exit. He thought about what Evelyn had said. He'll stay behind the curtain. Even leaving was part of the performance. Graceful disappearance, no trail, nothing that could be pinned to him directly. The documentation Sandra had presented was damning in aggregate, but Damien was insulated enough by layers of corporate structure that he would face no legal consequences from this morning. He would simply move on to the next thing, find the next angle, and Victoria would be left to understand, in the wreckage of the last 2 years, how thoroughly she'd been used as a piece in someone else's game. Logan stood, stretched his back. He'd been sitting rigid for the better part of 2 hours, and walked toward the window at the side of the room. Nashville outside was doing its November thing, gray bright, trees mostly bare now, the city looking stripped down and honest the way it got after the leaves were gone. He'd always liked this time of year, actually. Something clarifying about the bare branches. Everything that was there was actually there, nothing hidden by foliage. He heard footsteps and turned. Victoria was standing 10 feet away. Her attorney was across the room, engaged with the clerk. Victoria had crossed the floor herself, alone, which Logan suspected Patricia Holt would have advised against. They looked at each other. "I didn't know," she said. "I know." Her jaw tightened. I'm not asking for absolution, Logan. I'm telling you a fact." "I heard you. I believe you." Something worked through her expression that he couldn't quite name. "How long?" He knew what she was asking. "The company? My father died 8 years ago. The trust was set up before that. And you never—" She stopped, started again. "When we were together, you never told me." "I mentioned it once, early on." He watched her face. "You were on your phone." A beat of silence. Her expression did something complicated that she didn't fully manage to suppress. "That's not an excuse," she said, but her voice had lost some of its steadiness. "I'm not offering it as one." She crossed her arms, not hostile, more like she was holding herself together. "The man, Brooks." She said his name like it tasted bad. "How long have you known?" "About 4 months. And you didn't—" She stopped herself. "Tell you?" He considered how to say this. "I tried to figure out how to do that in a way that would land. Anything I said about him, you'd have heard as me being jealous or threatened." He paused. "I wasn't wrong about that." She didn't argue. That was something. "He was using me," she said. Flat. Stating a fact she was still in the process of accepting. "The documents suggest that, yeah. The whole thing, the consulting, the—" She stopped again. Her composure was holding, but it was work. "He saw me as a way into your company." "That's what the documentation indicates." Victoria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "I made your life very small, Logan. In my head. I made you into someone you weren't." He didn't say anything. "I thought I'd grown past you," she said. There was no pride in it, just the flat recognition of an error. "I thought I'd figured out that you'd been holding me back, that I needed someone who—" She stopped. "He was very good at helping me think that." "I know." "Does that make it better or worse, that I was manipulated?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "I think it makes it more complicated." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked out the window at the same gray Nashville sky he'd been watching. "I'm going to withdraw the petition," she said. He kept his voice even. "Okay? This isn't me giving up. I want to be a part of Owen's life. I want real time with him. That was always going to be the case. That was never what this was about." She looked back at him, something in her eyes that was difficult to sit with. Not quite remorse, or not only that, but something raw. The particular look of a person seeing themselves from the outside and not loving the view. "You could have told that attorney of yours to come in harder," she said. "On me. Personally." "Yeah." "You didn't." "No." "Why not?" He thought about Owen at the kitchen table with his cereal, asking questions too smart for his age. He thought about his father in a garage, teaching him the difference between real and performance. He thought about this woman at a party 6 years ago, talking to him for 2 hours because he wasn't trying to be anything other than what he was, and how rare that had seemed to her, and how it had mattered. "Because you're Owen's mother," he said. "That doesn't change. Nothing that happened changes that." Victoria pressed her lips together, looked away. "He asks about you," Logan said. "He misses you." She didn't respond to that immediately. He saw her swallow. "I'll call him tonight," she said quietly. "He'd like that." She nodded once, sharp, the way she did when she was managing herself, and then she walked back across the courtroom toward her attorney. Logan turned back to the window. The 30 minutes weren't up yet. He had time. He stood there watching the city, not thinking about anything in particular, or thinking about everything simultaneously, which amounted to the same quiet. The bare trees, the gray sky doing that thing where it looked like it might clear or might not, keeping its options open. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. "Evelyn. How are things going?" He typed back, "Recess. She's withdrawing the petition." A pause. Then, "Good." Then after another pause, "Your father would have handled it exactly the same way." Logan looked at the message for a moment. He thought about James Carter in a van with grease on his hands, talking about the difference between being real and performing it, about the particular stubbornness of a man who built something significant and refused to let the significance define him. He put the phone back in his pocket. Sandra appeared at his elbow. "Holt just informed me they're withdrawing the petition. Caldwell wants to confirm some procedural things, and then we're done for today." She was professional, controlled, but he could hear the satisfaction underneath it. "I've been doing this for 14 years. That's the cleanest reversal I've ever seen in 30 minutes. "It was the documents." "It was the documents," she agreed. Then, "It was also you. Sitting over there not performing, not being angry, not making it about anything other than Owen." She picked up her bag. "Judges noticed that. Caldwell definitely noticed. I wasn't doing it for effect." "I know. That's why it worked." She walked toward the defense table, and Logan followed, because the recess was ending and the judge was returning, and there were still procedural things that needed to happen before he could get back to his truck and his house and his son's soccer schedule and the grocery list that currently included the right kind of granola bars. But before he sat back down, he looked one more time at the back of the courtroom. The door was closed. The seat was empty. Damian Brooks was gone, absorbed back into whatever city he operated from, onto whatever next situation he'd identified, leaving no fingerprints. Logan sat down, folded his hands on the table, and waited for the gavel. He was not thinking about Damian Brooks anymore. He was thinking about Thursday. Evelyn Grant had a habit of cooking when she was processing something, which her husband had observed over 40 years of marriage and had learned to interpret as a reliable emotional index. When something minor was bothering her, she made soup. When something major was bothering her, she made an entire meal from scratch, bread included. The evening after the hearing, Logan arrived at her house to find bread in the oven and a pot on the stove. "That bad?" he said, coming in through the back door the way he always did. "Sit down." She handed him a glass of water without looking at him. "How's Owen?" "Good. At Kara's still. I'm picking him up after dinner." "Good." She stirred the pot. "The petition withdrawal is official?" "Filed this afternoon. Caldwell accepted it. We're going back in 2 weeks for the modified custody arrangement. Standard schedule. Victoria gets alternating weekends and 1 evening a week, potentially more as things stabilize." "That's fair." "It is." Evelyn set the spoon down on the rest and turned around. She looked at him with the particular directness she reserved for conversations she'd been rehearsing. "Meridian isn't going away," she said. Logan had expected this. "I know." The public exposure of the connection between Brooks and their acquisition strategy, that's going to create some internal disruption for them, but it doesn't eliminate the underlying interest. She came to sit across from him at the kitchen table. "We need to have a real conversation about the company's posture, whether we maintain the current structure or consider some changes that would make future approaches of this kind more difficult." "I've been thinking about that." "And?" "I think it's time to be less invisible," he said. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. This was not what she'd expected him to say. "Not for vanity," he said quickly. "Not for any of the reasons I've avoided it. But what happened in that courtroom today happened because I'd kept everything so compartmentalized that the people closest to me didn't know what was real. That's a vulnerability. Not just legally." He paused. "Owen's going to be old enough soon to understand the family business. I don't want him to find out about it the way a courtroom found out." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. The bread smell from the oven was warm and present. "You've been thinking about telling him," she said. "Yeah." "Not everything, not the numbers." "No, not yet. But who his grandfather was, what he built, why it matters." Logan looked at his hands on the table. "Owen asked me something a few weeks ago about whether telling the truth and winning are the same thing." "What did you say?" "I said truth was the part I could control." Evelyn nodded slowly. "And now?" "I think I've been using privacy as a substitute for honesty in some places. With Victoria, I should have been clearer, earlier. Not necessarily about the company, but about who I was." He pushed back from the table slightly. "I kept everything hidden because I thought it protected me, protected Owen. And it did, some of it. But it also left gaps that other people filled in with stories I didn't write." "That's probably the most self-aware thing you've said to me in several years," Evelyn said, dry enough to be Evelyn. "Don't get used to it." She almost smiled. "The Meridian question still stands." "Yeah." He straightened. "Get me a meeting with the board of advisors next month, and the corporate attorney. I want to review the trust structure and look at whether there are adjustments that would make the company less susceptible to this kind of indirect approach." He paused. "And I want to do a proper strategic review. The company's been on autopilot in some areas because I've been distracted." "The divorce." "The divorce, yeah. And before that, the marriage." He said it without bitterness, just fact. "There's work to do." Evelyn looked at him steadily for a moment. Then she stood and went back to the stove. "Stay for dinner," she said. It wasn't a question. "Owen needs... Call Kara. Owen can have dinner with his cousins. You need a meal that isn't a granola bar or something you made in 12 minutes. Logan reached for his phone. "How do you know about the granola bars?" "Owen told me. He said you keep buying the wrong kind." "He talks to you?" "He calls me every Sunday. We have a standing arrangement." She glanced back at him. "Did you not know that?" Logan stared at her. "He started it," Evelyn said mildly. "Called me out of nowhere in September, said he wanted someone else to talk to besides his dad and his aunt. I said that was fine." She turned back to the stove. "He mostly talks about animals and things that are unfair, occasionally about you." "What does he say?" "About me?" She stirred the pot. "He says you always know where his stuff is, even when he doesn't. He says you're not boring, but you act boring sometimes." A pause. "He says he knows you're sad sometimes, but you don't want him to see it, and he thinks that's dumb, but he understands why." Logan was quiet for a moment. "He's 7, he said." "He's your father's grandchild," Evelyn said simply. Logan called Kara. Dinner at the table with Evelyn and her husband, who had the quality of a man who understood when to be present and when to be quiet, and was usually wise enough to know which the situation required. They ate bread that Evelyn had made and soup that was better than anything Logan had made himself in months, and they talked about the company and the weather and Owen's soccer game on Thursday, and it was the most normal 2 hours Logan had spent in a long time. Driving home afterward, city lights making the wet roads gleam, he thought about the courtroom and the documents and Victoria's face and the empty seat in the back row. He thought about Owen's phone calls to Evelyn. He smiled at that, privately, in the dark of the truck. He thought about his father. Then he thought about Thursday's soccer game and whether Owen had his shin guards packed and whether he'd gotten around to buying the right granola bars. He hadn't. He'd need to stop on the way home. He made the turn into the parking lot of a grocery store that was still open, this being Nashville, and 9:30 on a Tuesday, and went in under the fluorescent lights to find the chocolate chip ones. Not the honey kind. Owen was very specific about this. He stood in the cereal aisle reading the back of a granola bar box and thought, this is also what it means to be a father. This, as much as any courtroom, any document, any battle fought on his son's behalf. Standing in a grocery store at 9:30 at night, making sure you got the right kind. He put 4 boxes in the basket and went to pay. The granola bars lasted 9 days. Logan knew this because Owen kept a running commentary on the supply. Not anxious, just informational. The way he narrated most things that mattered to him. "We're down to 2 boxes, Dad." "Dad, 1 box left." "Dad, we're out." Logan bought more. Life continued. November turned its corner into December, and Nashville did what it always did that time of year: strung lights on everything and smelled like wood smoke, and pretended the cold wasn't coming even as it arrived. Owen's soccer season ended the Thursday after the hearing, in a game that his team lost 4-2, which Owen processed by being silent for most of the drive home, and then announcing as Logan pulled into the driveway that he thought the referee had a personal problem with their team. The referee was a 16-year-old kid from Hendersonville, Logan said. He was biased. He was a teenager trying his best. They called that offsides in the second half, and it wasn't offsides. It was pretty close. It wasn't offsides, Dad. Logan parked the truck and looked at his son. Owen had his arms crossed and his shin guard still on, and a smear of field mud on his left cheek that he hadn't noticed yet. He looked, in that moment, so much like a smaller version of something Logan recognized from old photographs of James Carter, that it produced the particular chest tightening that Logan had learned to just let happen and pass. "You played a good game," Logan said. "That through ball in the first half was smart." Owen uncrossed his arms slightly. "The one to Marcus?" "Yeah, you read the defense right." A pause. "Marcus didn't finish it." "No, but you did the part you could control." Owen looked at him, then out the windshield, then back. "Are you going to say this is like a life lesson?" "Wasn't planning on it." "Good." Owen opened the door. "Because I already know." He climbed out of the truck, trailing mud and moral dignity, and Logan sat there in the driveway for a second longer, alone in the cab, and breathed. The modified custody arrangement went into effect the first week of December. Victoria got Owen on alternating weekends and Wednesday evenings. The first Wednesday, Logan dropped Owen off at the downtown apartment building, watched his son disappear into the lobby with his overnight bag, and drove home to a house that was very quiet in a way he hadn't anticipated. He ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter, watched television for 20 minutes without following any of it, went to bed at 9:15. The next morning, Owen came home full of information about Victoria's apartment, the view, the elevator, the fact that there was a coffee machine that made the coffee cold on purpose, which Owen considered suspicious. And Logan listened to all of it over breakfast and said the right things, and meant them. This was the work. Not the courtroom, not the documents, not the moment of revelation. The daily ongoing work of raising a child between two people who had failed at being married to each other, but had not failed at being his parents. Or were trying not to. The trying was the thing. Victoria called him 3 weeks after the hearing. Not through attorneys. Directly. His phone, his name on the screen, his thumb hovering for a second before he answered. "I'm not calling to relitigate anything," she said, before he could speak. "Okay. I wanted to say some things. Without lawyers." A pause. He could hear her in what sounded like her car, the ambient hum of engine and street. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." "Sounds like it." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "That thing where you say something neutral that means something else. I know you, just let me say this." He leaned against the kitchen counter. "Okay." She took a breath. "I was wrong about you. Not just factually. The whole picture I had built, the story I was telling myself about who you were, why you lived the way you lived, what it meant about your ambition or your vision or whatever word I was using. It was wrong. I know that now." "Victoria, I'm not done." Her voice was steady but effortful, the way she got when she was pushing through something. "I was angry at you for a long time, and I think I needed to be angry at you. It was easier than looking at what else was going on, with Damien, with myself." A pause. He knew what I wanted to hear, and I let myself hear it. "People like that are professionals," Logan said. "That's not a diminishment, it's accurate. I should have been smarter. You were focused on building your business. You were successful. You weren't looking for that kind of threat. You're being too generous. I'm being accurate." A long pause, the sound of a turn signal. "I ended things with him," she said. "Not that we weren't, but whatever it was, it's done." "Okay. I want you to know that I wasn't in love with him, Logan. I don't think I ever actually liked him that much as a person. I liked how he made me feel about my own potential. There's a difference. There is, he agreed. That's probably worse, right? Using someone because they make you feel good about yourself? I'm not grading it. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted. Less prepared, more careful. I talked to Owen last night. He told me about the granola bars at some length. Logan closed his eyes briefly. He really cares about those granola bars. He told me you always buy the right kind now. Took some trial and error. He said... Victoria stopped. Tried again. He said you know where all his stuff is even when he doesn't. He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like, of course you do. A pause. I didn't know where any of his stuff was when we were married. I always had to ask you. Logan didn't know what to say to that. He waited. I missed a lot, she said quietly. Not because I was bad. I don't think I was bad. I was just somewhere else a lot of the time, chasing the next thing. Her voice was careful, like she was walking somewhere she hadn't walked before and checking each step. He has your eyes. I noticed that again when I saw him Wednesday. He's always had your eyes, but lately he looks more like you, the way he thinks about things. He's a good kid. He's a remarkable kid, she said, and the way she said it didn't sound like a proud mother performing. It sounded like someone who was still getting to know a person they'd lived with for 7 years. I want to do better. With him, I know I can't walk back what's already been, but forward. Forward is the only direction, Logan said. That's what matters. Another pause. Longer this time. The company, she said. I'm not going to ask about it. That's your thing. But I want you to know that I wasn't filing that petition because of money. I genuinely believed you couldn't give him what he needed. I know. That makes it worse, maybe, that I believed it. Victoria. He kept his voice even. What's done is done. Owen needs both of us functional. That's what I care about. She let out a breath that had a lot in it. Okay? Then, tell him I'll see him Wednesday. He knows. He's already deciding what to show you. What do you mean? He's been collecting things, drawings, some rocks he found, a bird feather Gerald dropped. He's been putting them in a bag for Wednesday. A pause. When she spoke, her voice was a little different. Gerald? The Blue Jay. We have a bird feeder. You have a bird feeder? Owen's project. She was quiet for a second. Okay, she said softly. I'll see him Wednesday. She hung up, and Logan stood in his kitchen in the December quiet, holding the phone. He thought that conversation would have been impossible 6 months ago. He thought about what it took to get here. The paperwork and the courtroom and the documents and Evelyn's bread and the grocery store at 9:30 and the granola bars and the soccer game and all the 1,000 ordinary things that constituted a life, building up like sediment until they formed something solid enough to stand on. He put the phone down and went to fix the kitchen faucet, which had been dripping for 2 weeks. The meeting with the Carter Aviation Board of Advisors happened on a Thursday in the second week of December, in the Franklin office that Logan visited more frequently now. It was a modest building from the outside, deliberately so because James Carter had built it that way, but inside it ran to the comfortable efficiency of a place that took its work seriously without performing significance. There were 6 advisors, all of them people who had worked with either James or Logan for years, all of them aware of the full picture of the company's situation. Logan sat at the head of the table with Evelyn beside him, which was where she always sat, and laid out what he'd been thinking. He wasn't there to apologize for how he'd run things. He was there to propose changes. There was a difference. I've been reactive, he said without preamble. The Meridian situation should have been caught 3 years ago. We had the signals. I wasn't looking for them because I was confident the direct acquisition attempts had been settled. He looked around the table. Confident is another word for not paying attention. A man named Arthur Way, who'd been on the board for 11 years and had the particular quality of someone who said less than he knew, nodded once. The structural review I'm proposing isn't about expansion, Logan continued. It's about closing the gaps that made this kind of indirect approach possible. Personal relationships as acquisition vectors. That's what they found. We need to think about what else is accessible that way. You're talking about security protocols for leadership relationships. said a woman named Diane Fouche, the company's outside legal counsel. I'm talking about being smarter about who we let close, Logan said. Not paranoid, smart. He paused. My father built this company by trusting people. That's still the right approach. But trust without verification is just hope. Arthur Way looked at him. He'd say the same thing. I know, Logan said. He did say the same thing. I wasn't listening as carefully as I should have been. The meeting went 2 hours. By the end of it, they had an outline. A governance review, a security audit of relationships and access points, a proposal for what Diane called a strategic transparency plan, a controlled, deliberate expansion of the company's public profile that would make future covert approaches more difficult by eliminating the obscurity that made them possible. It's counterintuitive, Diane said, but sometimes the best protection is visibility. If the company's structure and ownership are a matter of public record, there's no covert angle to work. We keep the trust structure private, Logan said. Owen's involvement stays protected. But the company itself, he thought about what he'd said to Evelyn. It's time to be less invisible. Yeah, the company itself can be more visible. This changes some things, Arthur said. For you personally. I know. People will know who you are. They'll know what I own, Logan said. That's not the same thing. Arthur studied him for a moment, the way he sometimes did, assessing, calibrating. No, he agreed. It's not. Logan drove home from Franklin in the late afternoon, the sun setting early the way it did in December, orange going fast to dark. He had his window down a crack even in the cold, the same habit he'd had for years that drove Victoria crazy in winter. And he was thinking about the meeting and about the governance changes, and about what his father would have made of all of it. James Carter had not been a simple man. Logan understood that more now, at 32, than he had at 22. His father's choice to raise him without the weight of visible wealth had been a considered philosophy, not just a quirk. James had watched what money did to people when they led with it. He'd seen family friends build fortunes and lose their kids to entitlement and disconnection. He'd made a deliberate choice about what kind of man he wanted his son to be, and he'd built the structure of Logan's upbringing around that choice. The result was a man who could sit in a garage at 6 in the morning when his wife told him she was leaving and say okay and mean it in the particular way that means I see you and I see myself and I'm not going to make this ugly. That was James's inheritance more than any aircraft or terminal or trust document. Logan had spent the last year worrying that he'd failed some fundamental test. The divorce, the custody filing, the whole mess. He turned it over in his mind the way you turn a rock over, looking for what you'd missed. What he'd arrived at, slowly and without satisfaction, was this. He hadn't failed. He'd just been a person, with the particular failures that came with being one. He'd been private when he should have been clear. He'd been patient when he should have been direct. He'd assumed things would work out rather than doing the work to make them work out. These were real failures. He owned them. They were also not the failures Victoria had accused him of, and knowing the difference mattered. He pulled into the driveway as the last of the light left. The bird feeder was barely visible in the dark, a silhouette against the pale sky. Gerald was presumably elsewhere, being a blue jay. Inside he made dinner. Actual dinner, not standing at the counter, because Owen was coming home tomorrow and Logan had developed the habit, in Owen's absence, of doing things that made the house feel less empty. Cooking helped. It was one of the things he'd discovered about himself in the solitude of this year. He was better at being alone than he'd expected, but he was also not someone who thrived in it. He was built for a house with noise in it. He missed his son on the nights Owen wasn't here with a specific located ache that he hadn't figured out how to make smaller. He just lived with it. He ate, cleaned up, called Kara to catch up on the family news. She had 2 kids and a husband, and a life that was, by most measures, uncomplicated. And Logan found her uncomplicated life deeply reassuring to hear about. And then he sat at the kitchen table with the trust documents that Diane had emailed him and went through them with a pen, making notes in the margins. Around 9, his phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. Then something made him. "Logan Carter," he said. A pause. Then a voice he recognized, which sent a very specific kind of cold thing through his chest. It's Damien. Logan was quiet for a moment. He set down the pen. I don't have a lot to say to you, Logan said. His voice came out even, which surprised him slightly. I know, I'm not calling to... I'm not asking for anything. Damien's voice had lost some of its polish. Not much, but some. Enough to be noticeable. I just wanted to... I don't know. I don't have a good reason. I told myself I wasn't going to call. But here you are. Yeah. A pause. Here I am. Logan leaned back in his chair. He was aware of several things simultaneously. The anger that was there, real and legitimate, and the recognition that this man had used Victoria and used her badly, and the other recognition, harder to hold, that people who did things like Damien had done rarely called the people they'd wronged, and that calling meant something, even if he wasn't sure what. What do you want to say? Logan asked. The woman, Victoria. Damien said her name carefully. I need you to know that however it started, it wasn't just strategy, by the end. He stopped. She's a good person. I know that. I know you know. Another pause. I'm in this business because I'm good at reading people and finding angles. That's what I do. But somewhere in the last year, reading Victoria, she stopped being an angle. He said it like he was still figuring out what it meant. I didn't act on that. I let it go. Because the play was the play. But I need you to know it was real, whatever it was. Logan looked at the kitchen table, the trust documents, the pen. Why are you telling me? He asked. Because you're the person I wronged most directly, and because you apparently didn't destroy her in that courtroom when you could have. She's the mother of my son. I know, but that's not why you did it. Logan didn't answer that. I'm not going to keep coming after the company, Damien said. I know how that sounds, but the Meridian relationship, I'm stepping back from it. For reasons unrelated to the courtroom. For reasons related to Victoria. Silence on the line. For reasons related to Victoria, Mum, Damien confirmed. Logan thought about a lot of things in the next few seconds. He thought about anger and about what it cost to carry it. He thought about his father, who had told him once that the most dangerous mistake you could make about someone who'd wronged you was to assume they were simple. People were not simple, even the ones who did bad things. Okay, Logan said. That's it? What else do you want me to say? Another pause. Nothing, I suppose. Then we're done. Yeah. Damien breathed out. Take care of that kid. The line went dead. Logan set the phone down on the table, sat with the quiet of the kitchen for a long moment. Then he picked up the pen and went back to the trust documents, because the work was what there was, and the work was what he knew how to do. He made notes for another hour. Then he locked up and went to bed. Owen's first call to Damien about the granola bars. Logan's mind returned to that, accidentally, not meaning to, while he was driving Owen to school 3 days later. He shook it loose. Some things didn't need to be followed to their end. Some things you noted and filed and moved past. Dad, Owen said from the back seat. What? Do you think Gerald is going to come back in winter? Blue jays don't migrate, they stay. So he's out there in the cold? He's a bird. He's fine in the cold. Does he have enough food? That's what the feeder is for. Owen considered this. We should put more seeds in case it's extra cold. It's Nashville. It doesn't get that extra cold. Dad? We'll put more seeds in. Today? After school. Owen settled back, satisfied. The particular piece of a kid whose logistical concerns have been addressed. Logan drove through the gray December streets and felt, underneath everything, something he hadn't felt in a while. He wasn't happy exactly. That was too simple a word for what the last year had been. But he was present. Solidly, squarely in his actual life, not performing it or managing it or surviving it, but actually in it. This was something he'd learned that you couldn't manufacture. You couldn't decide to feel it. You could only create the conditions and wait for it to arrive. He pulled up to the school. Owen unbuckled and grabbed his bag and opened the door, and then stopped in a way that wasn't his usual exit. Dad? Yeah. At the court thing. Owen looked at his shoes, then up. I know you won, but you didn't act like you won. At dinner that night, you were just normal. Logan looked at his son. How do you know about the court thing? Aunt Kara, delivered without apology. Logan made another mental note about Kara. What about it? I just think Owen struggled with something, visibly. Marcus told me his parents fought a lot at the court thing, about money and stuff, and his dad acted like he won when he won, and it was weird, and Marcus hated it. He looked at Logan. You didn't do that. No. Why not? Because there's nothing to win, Logan said. Your mom and I are both your parents. That's not a competition. Owen thought about this for a while, long enough that Logan started to wonder if he should say something else. Then Owen nodded, grabbed his bag more firmly, and jumped out of the truck. Seeds today? He called back, already moving toward the entrance. After school, Logan confirmed. He watched his son disappear through the doors, sat in the drop-off line for a moment after Owen was gone. Seeds today. He put the truck in drive. Victoria came to pick Owen up the following Wednesday, which was the first time she'd come to the house since the separation. Logan had wondered if it would be awkward. It was a little, in the way that most honest things are awkward. Not unbearable, just real. She stood in the doorway while Owen ran around looking for one of the rocks from the bag he'd been preparing. You painted the porch railing, she said, in October. He'd fixed the front step at the same time. Small repairs he'd been putting off. It looks good. Thanks. Owen appeared with the rock, which turned out to be, up close, a piece of shale with a stripe of quartz through it. He presented it to Victoria with the seriousness of someone offering something of genuine value. It's from the creek behind the Martinsons' house, he said. The quartz part is sparkly in sunlight. Victoria took it carefully, turned it over, looked at it the way she hadn't looked at ordinary things, really looked, in a long time. It's beautiful, Bud. I have more. The bag's in my room. He was already heading back upstairs. Victoria stood in the doorway holding the piece of shale. She and Logan were quiet for a moment. He's been collecting those for weeks, Logan said. For me? Yeah. She looked at the rock. Her composure stayed intact, but it was close. Okay, she said quietly. Owen thundered back down with the bag, which turned out to contain the rocks, 2 drawings, a blue jay feather, Gerald's presumably, which Owen had found in the yard and which he reported had magical properties, though he couldn't specify what kind, and a small folded piece of paper that he instructed Victoria not to open until she was alone. She took all of it, held it against her chest. Logan walked them to her car. He stood on the driveway as Owen climbed into the back seat, and then Victoria turned, one hand on the door. Thank you, she said, for... She stopped, started again. For not making this ugly. It's his life, Logan said. Both of ours. Ugly doesn't help. She nodded. Something in her face that he recognized from a long time ago. Something unguarded before the years of armor. She got in the car. Logan stood in the driveway until the car turned out of sight. The December air was cold and clean. Somewhere in the backyard, Gerald was probably eating seeds. He went inside. The house was quiet. He put the kettle on and sat at the kitchen table, and he didn't feel lonely exactly, even though he was alone. He felt like a person at the end of a long day in a house that was his, with a son who would be home Friday, with work to do and problems to solve, and none of it, not a single piece of it, was a performance. This was the actual life. It had cost him things to get here, more than he'd expected, less than it could have. He thought that was probably the best anyone could say. The kettle began to whistle, low and building, and Logan got up to pour. Christmas came the way it always did in Tennessee, a little too warm for the first 2 weeks of December, then a cold front that arrived without apology around the 20th and made everyone scramble for coats they hadn't needed yet. Logan put lights on the porch railing he'd painted in October, mostly because Owen had asked, and because the freshly painted railing looked better with lights on it than without. Owen had opinions about the lights. He wanted the colored ones, not the white ones, a position he defended with conviction when Logan initially reached for the white strand at the hardware store. The colored ones are more Christmas, Owen said. The white ones are cleaner. Christmas isn't supposed to be clean. Christmas is supposed to be a lot. Logan put back the white strand and bought 3 boxes of colored lights. Owen was, in this particular instance, not wrong. They decorated on a Saturday, the weekend before Owen's winter break began. Kara drove down with her kids and the house had noise in it, the way Logan liked best. Not organized noise, just the accumulated sound of people living in a space together, conversations overlapping, someone always in the kitchen, Owen and his cousins arguing about something in the backyard with the specific intensity that cousins reserved for each other. Kara found Logan on the porch at one point, untangling a strand of lights that had knotted itself into something that seemed personal. "You look better," she said. "Than what?" "Than October. Than most of this year, honestly." She leaned against the railing and watched him work on the knot. "I was worried about you in September." "I know. You came down 3 times without being asked." "I came down because I wanted to." "You came down because you were checking on me." "Both things can be true." She watched him for a moment. "The thing with Victoria. The court thing. It settled okay?" "Yeah. Modified custody arrangement. Owen's doing fine." "Owen is always doing fine. Owen is constitutionally fine." She said it with the particular affection of someone who'd watched a child grow up and found the results genuinely impressive. "I'm asking about you." Logan got the knot to give way, started stringing the lights along the railing. "I'm okay," he said. "That's not a good answer." "It's the honest one." He looked at her. "I'm not struggling, Kara. It was hard, and it's less hard now. The custody thing was the worst part. Having someone stand in a courtroom and say I couldn't provide for my own kid." He paused. "I knew it wasn't true, but it still landed." "Yeah," she nodded. "What about the rest of it? The company stuff, the thing with that man Brooks?" "Getting handled." He moved down the railing with the lights. "Doing a governance review, making some changes to how we present publicly. Should close the gaps that made that kind of approach possible." "And you're okay being more visible? You've spent your whole adult life avoiding that." "Dad avoided it," Logan said. "I followed his lead. It made sense at the time." He looked out at the yard where he could hear Owen somewhere beyond the fence. "But I've been thinking about what it taught me versus what it cost. And I think the lesson was right, but I took it further than he intended." Kara looked at him. She had their father's eyes too, same as Logan did, same as Owen did. The Carter eyes, which were an ordinary shade of brown that somehow always looked like they were considering something. "He didn't tell you to hide," she said. "No, he told me not to lead with it. There's a difference." Logan clipped a light strand to the railing. "I turned it into hiding. That was me." "It worked, though. You knew Victoria liked you for you." "Victoria liked me for me," Logan said, and then decided that wasn't enough. Those are both true at the same time. He moved down the railing. "I don't know if knowing about the money would have changed that. Maybe it would have created a different problem." "Maybe." But keeping it hidden created a specific gap she could fill in with whatever story was being sold to her. He stopped. "I should have been clear. Not about the money. About everything else. About who I was and why I was the way I was, and what it meant." He looked at his sister. "I'm not great at that." "No," Kara agreed in the tone of someone who'd been watching this particular truth for 32 years. "Working on it." "Good." She pushed off the railing and headed back toward the door. "I'll get started on dinner. The kids are going to be useless in another hour." "Kara." She turned. "Thanks for coming down," he said. "All the times this year." She looked at him for a moment. "You do the same," she said, and went inside. He went back to the lights. Owen's winter break started on a Friday. Victoria took him for the first week, which was the arrangement they'd agreed to, the week before Christmas at Victoria's. Christmas Day itself split between both households, which was awkward in the logistical way that all split Christmas arrangements were awkward, but which both of them had committed to making work because Owen deserved a Christmas that wasn't shadowed by his parents' difficulty. Logan drove Owen downtown on Friday morning with his bag and his special rocks. He'd added to the collection, which now filled 2 sandwich bags. and dropped him at the apartment building with the kind of cheerful efficiency that he'd gotten better at projecting and that had gotten less projected over time. "You've got my number," Logan said. "I know. Call me if you need anything." "I know, Dad. Don't forget yours." "I have everything," Owen said, with 7-year-old certainty. "I packed it myself." Logan had, while Owen was in the shower that morning, quietly added the things Owen had forgotten. A charger, his library book, which was due the 5th, the good granola bars, three of them, tucked into the side pocket because Owen always wanted a snack after school, even when school was out. "Okay," Logan said. Owen studied him. "Are you going to be okay?" "Always." "That's not a real answer." "I'm going to be fine, bud. I've got some work to catch up on. I'll call Evelyn, maybe do something with the shop." Owen didn't look fully convinced, but he accepted it. He grabbed his bag, then turned back and, in a gesture that he definitely would have refused with cousins watching, gave Logan a hug that was fast and fierce and was over in 3 seconds. Then he was gone. Through the glass doors and into the lobby, and Logan sat in the car and watched the empty space where his son had been. He drove home and went straight to work. Not because the work needed it, some of it did, but not all, but because the work was the thing that had always steadied him. Underneath the truck that needed attention, or at the desk with the trust documents, or on a call with Arthur Way about the governance review, he felt like himself in a way that empty rooms didn't always allow. He called Evelyn that afternoon. "How long did it take you to learn to do the holidays alone?" he asked. A pause. "This is the first year you're doing it?" "First time he's gone for a whole week." "Ah." She thought about it. "It took me about 4 years, she said. "After what?" "After my daughter moved to Seattle. She was 22. I knew she was coming back for holidays, but that first week she was gone." She paused. "It's the space, isn't it? The specific shape of the space they leave." "Yeah. You learn to use it differently. Not to like it exactly. Just to use it." Logan looked at the ceiling of his home office, at the water stain in the corner that he'd been meaning to check for 3 months. "What did you do those first few years?" "Worked, mostly," bothered Harold. "Took up running, briefly." A dry pause. "Running, and I had a bad breakup. But the point is, you find what fills the space without pretending the space isn't there." "Good advice." "I've been giving advice for 60 years. I've gotten better at it." She paused. The governance review documents came back from Diane's office. "There are some things in the preliminary findings I want to walk you through." "Now?" "When you're ready." "Give me 20 minutes." He sat up. "I need to finish something in the garage first." He went to the garage, put on the radio, got back under the truck. The work, as always, was clarifying. He couldn't explain why. There was something about the physicality of it, the specific and solvable nature of mechanical problems, that organized his mind in a way that other things didn't. He'd tried to explain this to Victoria once, and she'd looked at him like he'd said something in a foreign language. He'd stopped explaining it after that, but he hadn't stopped doing it. 45 minutes later, with cleaner hands than he'd started with, and a differential that now operated correctly, he went back inside and called Evelyn. The preliminary governance findings from Diane's office were thorough, and in places uncomfortable to read. They identified 4 specific structural vulnerabilities in the way Carter Aviation Holdings interfaced with the outside world, points where personal relationships had created access to information that should have been more protected, where the trust structure's opacity had created ambiguity rather than protection, where Logan's deliberate distance from the company's public profile had left gaps that others could fill. Meridian Capital Advisors had found 3 of the 4. "They're good at what they do," Logan said, which was true even when the thing they were good at was working against him. "They are," Diane confirmed, on a call that included Evelyn and Arthur Way. "The recommendation is a phased approach. Phase 1 addresses the structural vulnerabilities. Phase 2 handles the public profile changes. Phase 3 looks at the trust structure itself and whether there are modifications that provide better protection while maintaining the intended benefits." Timeline? Phase 1, 60 days. The rest is longer. 6 months minimum for Phase 2. Phase 3 is ongoing. "Start Phase 1 now," Logan said. Before the new year, if possible. That's aggressive. I know. Can you do it? Diane thought about it. Yes, it'll require some of your time. I've got time. He did. The particular specific time of a man whose house was quiet and whose son was across the city with his mother, filling a sandwich bag with important rocks. They ended the call, and Logan sat at his desk with the preliminary report for another hour, reading through it with a pen in his hand, making the same kind of notes in the margins that his father used to make. The Carter marginalia, Evelyn called it, which was exactly what it sounded like. He thought about his father a lot that week. More than usual, which was already more than most people probably thought about their dead parents. James Carter had been gone for 8 years, which was long enough that the grief had changed shape. Not absent, just different, less sharp, more like a permanent weather condition than an acute wound. Logan had gotten used to it. He'd gotten used to the habit of thinking, what would you have done, and then trying to figure out if his own answer was close. He thought James would have handled the Meridian situation differently, in the sense that it probably wouldn't have gotten as far. His father had been less trusting, in some ways. Not cold, never cold, but more alert to the angles of things, more likely to ask the second and third question. Logan had inherited the first question and sometimes stopped there. He was working on the second and third. Christmas Eve fell on a Thursday that year. Logan spent the morning wrapping Owen's presents with the aggressive mediocrity he brought to all wrapping-related tasks. The paper was never quite the right size, the tape was always in the wrong place, the bows refused to stay on. He'd bought Owen a telescope, which had required research and 2 calls to a specialty store in Brentwood, and had ultimately turned out to be an expensive version of exactly what Owen wanted, which Owen had mentioned twice in October and once in November and not again since, clearly having concluded that mentioning it too often would reduce its chances of appearing. He'd also bought the 4th book in a series Owen had been reading, a pair of cleats for the spring soccer season, and a framed photograph of Owen and James Carter, grandfather and grandson, taken the summer before James died, when Owen had been one and James had been, in retrospect, at the very end of his life, though none of them had known it yet. In the photograph, James was holding Owen up in the air with both hands and looking at him the way people look at things they understand are temporary and precious. Owen was laughing, the full-body laugh of a 1-year-old for whom laughter and surprise were still the same thing. Logan had found the photo in a box of his father's things he'd been meaning to go through for 2 years. He'd had it printed and framed without telling anyone. He wrapped it carefully and put it under the tree. Owen came home at noon on Christmas Eve, Victoria dropping him off with the warm efficiency they'd developed. Not friends, not strangers, something functional and honest that might, with enough time, become something better. Owen burst through the front door already talking, telling Logan about the week, about a movie they'd watched, about a restaurant Victoria had taken him to where the pasta was enormous, and he'd eaten more than he'd ever eaten, and Victoria had been impressed. She said I ate like a Carter, Owen reported. What does that mean? I asked her. She said your dad used to eat a lot. Owen dropped his bag and turned in a circle surveying the house, which was decorated and had the tree on and smelled like the pine candle Logan had bought because real trees were more complicated to manage alone. The tree looks good. It's a candle. It smells real. That's the point of the candle. Owen went immediately to the tree and examined the wrapped presents with the focused assessment of a professional auditor. He did not touch anything. This was something Logan had never explicitly taught him. The not touching. But Owen had arrived at it himself, which said something Logan wasn't sure how to name. There's a lot of them, Owen said. Christmas. Which one's the big one? You'll find out tomorrow. Owen stood and looked at his father with the expression that meant he was calculating something. Is it the thing I mentioned in October? What did you mention in October? Owen studied him, knew he was being managed, accepted it with the resignation of someone who'd been doing this particular dance for his whole conscious life. Fine, he said. Tomorrow. They made dinner together. Logan cooked, Owen narrated, and occasionally assisted by stirring things when asked, and once nearly knocking a bowl of eggs off the counter, which Logan caught without comment because the catching was by now automatic. They ate at the kitchen table with the colored lights visible through the window, and the candle doing its pine impression, and the particular quiet of a house with exactly 2 people in it being exactly enough. Owen told Logan about the week in more detail than the initial burst. The movie, the restaurant, a conversation he'd had with Victoria about his grandfather James, which Victoria apparently knew more about than Owen had realized. She said he was kind, Owen said. Like actually kind, not fake kind. Yeah, Logan said. That's right. She said she wished she'd paid more attention to the stories you told about him. Logan looked at his son across the table. When did you two have this conversation? Like Tuesday. We were making hot chocolate. Owen pushed food around his plate. She was sad, I think. Not crying, just her face looked tired. Yeah. I told her Grandpa James sounds like someone I'd have liked. You'd have loved him, Logan said. He'd have thought you were the best thing. Owen considered this. Because I'm his grandkid? Because you're you. He had standards. Owen almost smiled. What was he like? Really? Logan thought about where to start. He told Owen things. Pieces. Age-appropriate fragments. But Owen was 7 now and asking a real question and deserved a real answer. He was stubborn, Logan said. Real stubborn. In the way where he'd thought something through and he wasn't going to change his mind without a very good reason. Not bullheaded. There's a difference. He just didn't move without cause. He paused. He was funny, quietly funny. He'd say something and it would take you a second and then you'd laugh and he'd be looking at something else by then, like he hadn't said anything. Owen was listening with both elbows on the table, which was technically against the rules, and Logan didn't mention it. He could fix anything, Logan continued, not because he had to. He had money, Owen, real money. He could have paid someone to fix everything, but he learned how to fix things because he thought it mattered to know how things worked from the inside. Logan looked at his hands. He said you couldn't understand something you'd never taken apart. Is that why you fix things? Yeah. And why you taught me? Logan looked at him. Owen said this as a statement, not a question. The particular confidence of a kid who'd just fit 2 pieces together and was presenting the result. Yeah, Logan said. That's why. Owen nodded slowly, processing. He sounds like you, he said. Except funnier, maybe. Almost definitely funnier. And he built the plane company. He did. Which is ours now. Logan was quiet for a second. They hadn't had this conversation explicitly. Not in full, not with the word ours in it. Yeah, he said carefully. Which is ours now. Owen looked at him with a directness that was James Carter's as much as it was Logan's. Can I see it sometime? The company? Yeah, Logan said. I think it's time for that. Owen went back to his dinner. Okay, he said, like they'd agreed on something entirely normal, which maybe they had. Christmas morning had the particular chaos of a 7-year-old who'd been awake since 5:45 and had exercised extraordinary restraint until 6:15 before appearing in Logan's doorway and asking, very quietly, if it was time yet. It was not time. It became time at 6:30, after Logan had made coffee and Owen had vibrated at a frequency visible to the naked eye while technically sitting still on the couch. The telescope was the right choice. Owen held the box for a full 10 seconds before he said anything, which was the longest Owen had ever been silent about anything, and then he said, Dad, in a specific way that was not the word but everything around it. It was in October, Logan said. You remembered. I remember everything. I know. Owen looked at the box. You're like a human spreadsheet. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Owen laughed. The real one, the unguarded one, and Logan sat on the couch next to him and helped him open the box. They spent the morning in the backyard despite the cold, setting up the telescope according to instructions that proved, as instructions often did, to be more confident than accurate. Logan had to look 3 things up on his phone. Owen had opinions about the angle. Gerald the blue jay appeared at the feeder and watched them with the sideways attention of a bird who found humans baffling but consistently interesting. Gerald thinks we're weird, Owen said. Gerald is a bird with no perspective on the situation. Gerald has a lot of perspective. He lives out here. This is his yard. It's my yard. Gerald is a guest. A guest who's been here every day since September. A regular guest. Owen peered through the eyepiece at the sky, which was heavy with clouds. I can't see anything. You need clear sky. Night's better anyway. You said we could look at the moon tonight. If it's clear. It'll be clear, Owen said, with the confidence of someone who had not checked the weather forecast. It was not fully clear. It was partly cloudy, with breaks. That night, wrapped in jackets on the back porch, they caught 40 minutes of clear sky and found the moon, which was 3/4 full and so bright through the eyepiece that Owen made a sound that was involuntary and then looked slightly embarrassed about it. It's real, Owen said. Yeah. I mean, I know it's real, but it looks real. That's what the telescope does, closes the distance. Owen looked for a long time without saying anything. Logan sat next to him in a folding chair and drank coffee that was already getting cold in the night air and looked at the sky with the naked eye, which was good enough. Dad, Owen said, still looking, when you said it's time to see the company, what did you mean? I meant I want to show you where you come from, the real version, not just what I've told you. The planes, the terminals, the people who work there, the whole thing. Logan looked at his coffee. I've been thinking about it for a while, about when the right time was. Why now? Because this year taught me something. He paused, looking for the right words. Not the clean version, but the honest one. I kept things separate for a long time. Who I am here, he gestured vaguely at the house, the yard, the bird feeder, the whole small daily geography of their life, and what I own. I thought keeping them separate protected something. Did it? Some things, but it also created confusion for people around me. He looked at his son. You're old enough to understand both parts. I don't want you to find out about half your own history some other way. Owen considered this. He had the look he got when he was thinking about something seriously, the vertical line between his eyebrows that had appeared when he was 3 and never left. Is it because of the court thing? The stuff with Mom? Partly. Also because you asked. I asked in October. I heard you in October. I'm answering in December. Logan met his eyes. I'm not always fast. Owen was quiet. Then, Mom said you were always exactly what you said you were. She said that's the thing she didn't see right. He paused. She didn't say it to me directly. She was on the phone. I heard it. Logan looked at his son, thought about Victoria in her car on the phone, saying something true about a man she'd spent years misreading, thought about how these things moved, slowly, sideways, landing in unexpected places. She's right, he said. I know, Owen said, like it was obvious, like it had always been obvious. Maybe it had been. The clouds came back in and covered the moon, and they packed up the telescope and went inside. Logan made hot chocolate, and the real kind, not the packet kind, because Evelyn had taught him, and Evelyn had standards. And they sat at the kitchen table until well past Owen's bedtime, and Logan talked about James Carter. Not the summary version, the real version. The garage, the engines, the philosophy of not leading with money, the summers of real work, the things his father had said that had become the architecture of how Logan thought about nearly everything. Owen listened with the particular quality he had when something mattered to him, completely still, mostly, except for his hands around the mug. He asked questions, good ones, the kind that meant he was actually building a picture, not just collecting facts. At some point, Logan wasn't tracking the time closely, Owen said, he was making sure you turned out right. Yeah. And you're doing the same thing with me. It wasn't a question. Trying to, Logan said. Owen considered the mug in his hands. I think it's working, he said, with the kind of measured generosity of a kid who had assessed the evidence and returned a verdict. Logan looked at his son, this boy with the Carter eyes and the gap in his teeth, and the collection of important rocks, and the negotiations about granola bars, and the soccer game he'd lost with dignity, and the telescope he'd waited 3 months to mention again, because he'd correctly intuited the dynamics of the situation. Thanks, bud, Logan said. You're welcome, Owen said seriously. They cleaned up. Owen went to bed without significant argument, which was itself a small Christmas miracle. Logan locked up the house and turned off most of the lights and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the dark backyard, the bird feeder a shadow, the telescope stored in the garage for the next clear night. He thought about the year. The whole of it, January to December, the divorce and the filing and the courtroom and the documents and Damien's phone call and the governance review and Evelyn's bread and Kara's visits and Owen's rocks and Gerald and the granola bars and the hot chocolate and the moon through the eyepiece, so bright it startled you into making sounds you hadn't planned. It had been, by any measurement, a hard year, the kind that changed the shape of things and didn't change them back. He was glad it had happened, not for the pain of it. He wasn't built for that kind of calcified gratitude, the kind that required you to love your suffering. He was glad in a simpler way, glad that the true shape of his life had finally been visible, to the people who needed to see it, and to himself. Glad that what was real had turned out to be enough. His father had told him once that you couldn't know what you were made of until something tested it. Logan had thought, at the time, that this was the kind of thing fathers said. He'd filed it under probably true, not yet verifiable. It was verifiable now. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and slept the deep, uncomplicated sleep of someone who has been honest all day and has nothing to revise in the morning. January came in cold and honest, the way January usually did after a December that had been too mild for too long. The trees along the edge of Logan's property were bare and stayed bare, and the bird feeder needed refilling every 3 days now because Gerald had apparently told every bird in Davidson County about the situation, and there were more of them every morning. Owen kept account. He had a notebook. 14 today, he announced one morning, pressed against the kitchen window in his pajamas while Logan made breakfast. Gerald and 6 of his friends and some small brown ones and 2 cardinals. Cardinals are the red ones. I know which ones the cardinals are, Dad. Just checking. The female cardinal is brownish red. The male is brighter. Owen stepped back from the window and picked up his orange juice. Gerald is still the biggest. Gerald has always been the biggest. He's also the meanest. He chased the small brown ones off twice. That's Blue Jays, territorial. It's rude, Owen said with the conviction of someone who held birds to behavioral standards. Logan slid a plate of eggs onto the table, sat down across from his son. The kitchen was warm, and the windows were steamed slightly from the cold outside, and the morning was exactly what it was, ordinary and specific and his, and he'd gotten better over the months since Christmas at sitting inside ordinary things without needing them to be more. That was something the year had taught him, not a lesson he'd sought, the kind that arrived sideways through accumulated experience and settled into you like a change in how you held yourself. Owen ate and talked about school, about a project on the solar system that he was approaching with an intensity that suggested the telescope had done something significant to his relationship with space. He wanted to do Jupiter. He'd read that Jupiter had 79 moons, which he considered an unreasonable number and also deeply impressive. Can we look at Jupiter? He asked. Need the right conditions, clear sky, right time of year. When? March, maybe. I'll check. Write it down. I'll remember. Dad. Owen gave him a look. Write it down. Logan wrote it on the notepad by the coffee maker. Jupiter, March. Owen watched until the pen was back on the counter and then returned to his eggs satisfied. This was the rhythm of them, the specific, unrepeatable rhythm of this father and this son, built from years of mornings exactly like this one. And Logan understood, in the way you understand things you've stopped taking for granted, that the rhythm itself was the inheritance, not the company, not the trust documents, not the aircraft and the terminals and the consolidated balance sheet that would have made Victoria's legal team look considerably more carefully at their case if they'd seen it 2 years earlier. The rhythm, the notebook, the 14 birds, Jupiter in March. This was what his father had been building toward, all those years in garages and at kitchen tables and in the front seats of pickup trucks talking about the difference between real and performance. Not a company, a man who understood what mattered, and through that man, a boy who was learning the same thing in real time, one morning at a time. The Carter Aviation Holdings strategic review concluded at the end of January in a meeting that ran 4 hours and ended with decisions that Logan had known, going in, were the right ones and still had to sit with for a few days after. The company would become more publicly visible, Not dramatically, not press conferences and profile pieces, not the performance of significance that his father had specifically taught him to distrust. But the corporate structure would be properly registered in public records. The ownership would be traceable. The board of advisors would expand to include 2 independent members with public profiles in the aviation industry. The deliberate obscurity that had made covert approaches like Meridian's possible would be replaced with a transparency that was, paradoxically, more protective than the opacity had been. Diane had been right about that. Visibility, deployed carefully, was a form of armor. There was also the matter of Logan's own profile. This was the part he'd taken the few days to sit with. Evelyn, characteristically, had not pushed. She'd presented the recommendation and then waited. "What does it actually mean?" Logan had asked. "In practical terms." "It means when someone searches Carter Aviation Holdings, your name comes up clearly as owner and trustee. It means industry publications know who you are. It means at some events, not many, selected, you're present as yourself rather than absent." "I've been going to those events as James Carter's son, as a representative of the trust, not as the principal." Logan had looked out the window of her office, the same view he'd looked at 100 times over the years. Her back garden, which was immaculate in summer and structural in winter, bare bones of rose canes and the skeleton of an old oak she refused to have taken down despite the root situation. "If I do this," he'd said, "it changes things. Some things. People will know what I own. They'll start treating me differently. Some of them, yes. The ones I don't know well enough to know whether they'd be treating me differently." "That's the calculation your father made," Evelyn said, "and it was right for his situation. He was starting from zero. He needed to build the business without the weight of his own wealth complicating every relationship. You're not starting from zero. You're managing something that's already built." She paused. "And Owen is 7. In 10 years, he'll be navigating this on his own terms. The foundation you build now, how you hold this thing, how visible or invisible it is, what story exists about it, shapes what he inherits." Logan had thought about Owen at the kitchen window counting birds. He'd thought about the photograph of James and Owen in the blue room, the one he'd wrapped carefully and put under the tree, and that now sat on Owen's bookshelf, which was where Owen had put it within an hour of opening it. He'd thought about the conversation on Christmas night, the hot chocolate getting cold, Owen asking real questions and deserving real answers. "Okay," he'd said. Okay as in do it." Evelyn had nodded once, not triumphant, just the satisfaction of someone who'd given the right advice and seen it taken. The governance changes were filed in February. Logan's name appeared in public records as principal of Carter Aviation Holdings for the first time. Industry publications noted it, briefly, as a minor item, because the company had been operating without controversy for years, and there was no drama in a trust becoming transparent. A trade magazine called and asked for a comment. Logan gave them 2 sentences that were accurate and said nothing performative. They ran it at the bottom of a longer piece about Southeast Regional Aviation. His neighbor Dale Hutchins called him the day after the piece ran. "Carter Aviation Holdings," Dale said without preamble. "That you?" "Yeah." A long pause. "That's a big company, Logan." "It's a family company. Your family company. My dad built it. I run it." Another pause. "You've been fixing my lawnmower for 2 years, Dale said, in the tone of someone recalibrating their entire understanding of a relationship. "Your lawnmower keeps breaking," Logan said. "That's more about you than me." Dale laughed, surprised into it. Then, "You should have said something." "You didn't ask." That's not how it works." "Dale," Logan kept his voice easy. "You need the lawnmower fixed again in spring. You can ask me or you can call someone. Both are fine. Nothing's different." Dale was quiet. "Huh," he said finally. "Yeah." "Well," Dale seemed to gather himself. "Okay then." They talked for another 10 minutes about something unrelated, a drainage issue Dale was having along his property line, and by the end of it, the recalibration was mostly complete and Dale was back to being Dale. Which was, Logan reflected, what he'd expected. Most people, given enough time and enough ordinary interaction, could accommodate new information about someone they already knew. What they couldn't accommodate was the performance of it. The revelation staged for effect. The unveiling designed to impress. He'd learned that from his father, too. In February, Victoria called to say she wanted to talk about increasing her time with Owen. Not through attorneys, she was clear about that, just between them. They met for coffee, which was strange in the specific way that familiar things made strange by circumstance are strange. The coffee shop was one they'd both been to before, separately, during the months of their separation. Logan hadn't thought about this when he'd suggested it, and apparently neither had Victoria. And they'd both arrived and noticed it simultaneously and said nothing about it. Victoria ordered what she'd always ordered. Logan noticed, but didn't mention it. "He's doing well," Victoria said, getting into it directly, which was her style and always had been. "I can see that. I don't know, centered is the word. He knows what he thinks about things. He's always been like that. He's more so now." She turned the cup in her hands. "I think the stability, having the house be constant, having you be constant, it's done something good for him." "He's resilient," Logan said. "He was going to be okay regardless. Don't be modest on his behalf. You did a good job." She said it plainly, without the difficulty that such acknowledgments had cost her earlier in the year. Something had changed in her, or continued to change. The process that had begun in the courtroom lobby, or maybe before that was still working its way through her. "I wasn't there for a lot of it, the day-to-day. I know that. You were building something. I was using building something as a reason to not be present." She looked at him. "Those are different things." Logan didn't argue with her. She was right, and she knew she was right, and pointing that out wasn't what she'd come here for. "I want Wednesdays extended," she said. "Overnight, not just the evening, and potentially one more weekend per month." He considered it. Not as a legal matter, they were past that, or he was, but as a practical one, as a question about what Owen needed. "He'd be okay with that," he said. "He likes his time with you. He told me the hot chocolate conversation you had in December." Victoria looked briefly confused. "At Christmas?" "You were on the phone. He was listening." Her expression shifted. "I didn't know he heard that." "He hears most things. He's quiet about what he does with them." Logan drank his coffee. "What you said. That I was always what I said I was. He filed that." Victoria pressed her lips together. Not regret exactly. Something more complicated. "I believed it when I said it." "I know. I should have believed it when it was happening." She set down the cup. "That's the thing I keep coming back to. I had all the information. You weren't hiding who you were, but not really. The company, yes, but the rest of it, the values, the way you operated. It was all right there." She shook her head. "I just decided it meant something smaller than it did." Logan looked at the table. "Damien was good at finding what you wanted to hear. That's not an excuse." "No, but it's part of the story." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the February street moved with its usual February business. People in coats, a dog on a leash, a delivery truck double parked with philosophical commitment. The ordinary world, doing what it did. "I've been talking to someone," Victoria said. "A therapist. For about 3 months." She said it in the straightforward way she'd started saying difficult things. Not as a confession, just as information. "She asked me something last week that I've been thinking about. She asked me what I was actually afraid of, underneath all of it. The ambition, the constant reaching for the next thing." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I was afraid of being the woman I grew up watching my mother be. A good woman who never got to the thing she was actually supposed to do." She looked at him. "My mother taught elementary school for 32 years. She was good at it, she liked it, but she always talked about the other things she might have done if she'd made different choices." Victoria looked at her hands. "I decided I wasn't going to have those other things. I was going to get the main thing, whatever it cost. And the cost was seeing what was actually in front of me." She exhaled. "You, Owen. The life that was already there." She wasn't saying it with self-pity, more with the flat, clear-eyed quality of someone reading a document and reporting what it says. She asked me if I got the main thing, I told her I built a company. She said that wasn't what she asked. Logan said nothing. I don't know yet, Victoria said. What the main thing is, I'm still figuring that out. She picked up her cup. But I know what some of it is. It's Owen, and it's being better than I was. She met his eyes. Not better than you. Better than the version of me that stood in that courtroom and thought she'd already won. Logan looked at her for a moment. This woman he had loved and married and tried to build a life with, and failed and not failed, depending on which part of the life you were measuring. She was not the person she'd been a year ago. Neither was he, probably. That was how years worked, if you let them. Wednesday overnights, he said, and one extra weekend per month. We'll see how Owen settles into it and adjust from there. Something in her face, or relief, or the thing underneath relief. Thank you. It's not a favor, he said, not unkindly. It's what Owen needs. That's the whole calculation. She nodded. She understood. She was understanding more things now and slower to resist the understanding. They finished their coffee, walked out onto the February street together, parted at the corner without awkwardness. Not warmly exactly, but cleanly. Two people who had learned through some pain and some stubbornness and some grace how to be on the same side of something that mattered. Logan walked to his truck, sat in it for a minute before starting it. He was 32 years old and he was divorced, and his company was becoming more visible than it had ever been, and his son was counting birds and waiting for Jupiter in March, and some mornings the house was very quiet in ways that still took adjustment. This was the life, not the one he'd planned, not the one James Carter had planned for him, something that had been built from the materials available, with the tools he had, in the actual conditions rather than the imagined ones. He started the truck. The trip to the aviation terminal happened on a Saturday in early March, which was also, as it happened, a clear day. The kind of clear that March produced occasionally in Tennessee as a preview of what was coming, before pulling it back for another 3 weeks of unpredictable weather. Owen had known it was coming. Logan had told him the week before, in the way he told Owen things, directly, at the kitchen table, over the meal. This weekend I'm going to show you the company, the actual thing, where it is, what it looks like, some of the people who work there. Owen had said, okay, and then gone back to his dinner, and then, approximately 45 seconds later, which airport? A private terminal south of the city, not Nashville International. We have our own. Owen had looked up from his plate. Our own terminal? Our own terminal. A pause while Owen processed this. Are there planes? Yeah, the whole fleet doesn't sit there, but there are usually several aircraft. Big ones? Some. Owen had nodded with the expression of someone updating a very significant internal file. Then he'd gone back to his dinner. The morning of the trip, Logan woke at 6 to find Owen already dressed and eating cereal at the kitchen table, which had never happened without prompting in Owen's entire conscious life. You're up, Logan said. It's the terminal day. We don't leave until 9. I know. Owen looked unbothered. I wanted to be ready. Logan made coffee. Let Owen be ready. By 8:30, they were in the truck heading south out of Nashville, and Owen watched the city give way to the outer edge of the metro area and then to the stretches of flat land and light industry that populated this part of Middle Tennessee. And he asked the kind of questions he asked when he was genuinely interested in something. Not rapid fire, but specific, each one waiting for the full answer before the next arrived. How many people work there? At the terminal, around 40. Across the whole company, it's closer to 300. What do they do? The 300. Pilots, mechanics, dispatchers, operations people, administrative staff. The maintenance crew is the biggest group. Mechanics like you. Better than me, most of them. I'm self-taught. They're trained. You could be trained. I could. I just went a different direction. Owen considered this. Did Grandpa James work on the planes himself? Early on, less later. He said once that after a while your job changes from doing the thing to making sure the people who do the thing have what they need to do it. What does that mean? Means the company became his way of taking care of people, giving them good work, good conditions, something to build toward. Logan kept his eyes on the road. He thought that was worth doing, that a company that treated its people right was worth more than one that just made money. Does ours? Yeah, Logan paused. I try to. The people who've been there longest, some of them 30 plus years, they stay because it's a decent place to work. That's not an accident. That's your grandfather's philosophy still running. Owen was quiet for a moment, watching the landscape move past his window. And now it's yours. And now it's mine. And one day, Owen stopped himself, looked at Logan sideways. And one day, Logan said, it might be yours, if you want it, if it fits who you turn out to be. He glanced at his son. Nobody's making that decision now. You've got about 20 years to figure out who that is. What if I want to be a marine biologist? Then be a marine biologist. We'll hire someone to run the company. Owen seemed to find this satisfying. He went back to the window. They turned off the main road and onto a private access road that Logan had driven 100 times, through a security gate that recognized his vehicle, and then along a stretch of fenced perimeter that opened finally onto the terminal complex. A series of low modern buildings, efficient and clean, and beyond them the tarmac where, on this Saturday morning, 3 aircraft sat in various states of preparation and maintenance. Owen went very still when he saw them. Not the dramatic stillness of a kid trying to perform awe, the real kind. The involuntary arrest of movement that happens when something lands differently than you expected. Logan parked and looked at his son. Okay? They're big, Owen said. Wait until you're next to one. They got out. The morning was cold and bright, the kind of March morning that apologized for February by being everything February wasn't. A maintenance crew was working on the furthest aircraft. Logan could see 2 people on a lift, could hear the specific sounds of that particular kind of work from 100 yards away. And closer, a ground crew was doing pre-flight checks on a smaller jet that was scheduled for a charter later that afternoon. Logan walked Owen toward the nearest aircraft, a mid-sized business jet that was between charters and sitting quiet on the tarmac. Owen walked next to him and didn't say anything, which was notable, and didn't run ahead, which was also notable. And then they were standing next to it. Actually next to it, the fuselage close enough to touch. And Owen looked up at it with his hands in his jacket pockets and his breath making small clouds in the cold air. Grandpa built this? He said. He built what paid for it. The company paid for the planes. But he built the company. Yeah. Owen reached out and put one hand flat against the fuselage. Just laid it there for a second. Logan watched and said nothing. It's cold, Owen said. Metal in the morning. Does it warm up when it flies? The inside does. The outside doesn't really. It goes colder at altitude. Owen took his hand back, kept looking up at it. Can we go inside? That's why we're here. A woman named Ruth Chen met them at the steps. She'd been with Carter Aviation for 15 years, ran the terminal operations with a combination of competence and good humor that Logan had relied on more than he'd ever fully told her. She shook Logan's hand and then crouched down slightly to look at Owen. So you're Owen, she said. Owen looked at her. Do you know me? Your dad talks about you. She straightened. Come on, I'll show you the cockpit. Owen looked at Logan, who nodded. Then he followed Ruth up the stairs with the focused dignity of someone attending something important. Logan followed them. The next 2 hours were, in their way, among the best 2 hours Logan could remember in recent years. Not dramatic, not the kind of thing that would make a good condensed story. Just Owen in a cockpit asking questions about every instrument, while Ruth answered with a patience that suggested she actually enjoyed the interrogation. Owen in the passenger cabin, walking the aisle, pressing the seat buttons with scientific thoroughness. Owen in the maintenance hangar, watching with wide eyes as a mechanic walked him through what he was doing. The mechanic, a 26-year-old named Dennis, who had the particular enthusiasm of someone who loved their work and didn't often get to explain it to an audience, speaking to Owen like a small peer, which Owen responded to by asking questions that made Dennis pause and think. He's sharp, Ruth said quietly, standing next to Logan while this exchange happened. He's 7. I know, I've got a 9-year-old. They're not all like that. Logan watched his son. Owen had his notebook out, the bird notebook, repurposed. and was writing something down while Dennis talked. The mechanic had noticed and slowed his explanation without being asked, pacing it to Owen's pen. Logan thought about James Carter in a garage, telling a 16-year-old that the people who worked for you would know in 30 seconds whether you were real or performing. He thought about Dennis slowing down without being asked. He thought about Owen writing in a bird notebook in an aviation hangar, and whether James Carter, who had never been a sentimental man but had been a deeply feeling one, would have recognized this moment for what it was. He thought James would have. He thought James would have said nothing about it, just absorbed it the way he absorbed things, and then later, in private, allowed himself to feel it. Logan was his father's son. He did the same. After the hangar, Ruth walked them to the roof deck of the main terminal building, an outdoor space used for observations and occasionally for events, where the full scope of the tarmac and the sky above it was visible. It was colder up here, the wind moving without obstruction, and Owen tucked his hands in his pockets and stood at the railing and looked. Logan stood next to him, didn't say anything. After a while, Owen said, "Is this what it was like for you, the first time?" "Similar. I was older, 14. Were you scared?" "Of what?" Owen thought about it. "Of it being too big, like too much to be in charge of someday." Logan looked at his son, 14 years old when he'd stood in a place like this and his father had stood next to him. He tried to remember what he'd felt, the bigness of it, the weight of something being handed toward him, not yet in his hands, but approaching. "Yeah," he said. "A little." "What did Grandpa say?" "He said it would always be too big if you tried to hold it all at once. He said the trick was to hold the part that was in front of you and trust that the rest would still be there when you got to it." Owen absorbed this, looked out at the tarmac where the charter jet for the afternoon was being towed into position. "That's like soccer," he said. Logan blinked. "How's that like soccer?" "You can't play the whole game at once. You play the part that's happening." Owen watched the jet. "Marcus thinks too much about the end of the game. Coach says it makes him slow in the moment." Logan thought about this. "Yeah," he said. "It's like soccer." Owen nodded. Like that settled something. Then he was quiet again, comfortable with the quiet the way he sometimes was. Inherited that from Logan, who'd inherited it from James, the particular Carter ease with silence that had confounded Victoria for 6 years and which Owen wore without knowing it was something to be worn. Ruth appeared with 2 paper cups of hot chocolate from the terminal's small cafe, handed one to each of them, and went back inside with the unobtrusive efficiency that made her very good at her job. Logan held the cup in both hands against the cold. Owen did the same. "Dad," Owen said. "Yeah." "Thank you for bringing me here." "I should have brought you sooner." "You brought me when it was right." Owen said this without judgment, as pure statement. "Maybe it was. That's what you do. You're slow, but you're right." Logan looked at his son. "That's still not the nicest thing you've ever said to me," he said. Owen almost smiled. "The spreadsheet thing stands." "Fair enough." They drank their hot chocolate on the roof deck in the March wind, watching the tarmac and the sky and the ground crew moving with the purposeful efficiency of people who knew their work. A small plane came in on the far runway, tiny at first, and then suddenly actual-sized in the way landing aircraft always were. Owen tracked it without pointing, just with his eyes. Logan looked at him, this boy, this specific and unrepeatable person, and thought about what it meant to give someone something. Not the company, not the money, not the documents and the trust structure and the fleet and the terminals. The other thing. The thing that preceded all of it and outlasted all of it. The understanding that what you built should be in service of people, not the other way around. The understanding that who you were when no one was watching was the only version of you that actually counted. The understanding that real things, love, integrity, the particular weight of a father's hand on a small shoulder, didn't need to be announced to be present. They just were. Every day. In the garage and at the kitchen table and on the soccer field and in the drop-off line and at 9:30 in a grocery store choosing the right granola bars. Owen would learn this the way Logan had learned it. Imperfectly, slowly, through mistakes that would cost him things and teach him more than any success. He would not be spared difficulty. Logan wouldn't want to spare him difficulty even if he could. Difficulty was the teacher that everything else pointed toward, but he would not learn it alone. That was the difference. He would have the voice, his father's voice, and through his father's voice, James Carter's voice, running underneath everything, telling him the thing that mattered most. You are not the sum of what you own. You are the sum of what you do with it. And the most important thing you can do with anything is use it to take care of the people who need you. The charter jet started its engines. The sound crossed the tarmac and climbed into the bright March air. Owen watched it without moving, his face turned toward the sky. Logan watched his son. Tomat. Somewhere on the 14th floor of a glass building in Nashville's Gulch neighborhood, Victoria Reed sat at her kitchen table on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and a view of the city that she'd chosen partly for what it said about her and had slowly stopped needing it to say anything. On the table in front of her was the piece of folded paper Owen had given her at Christmas, the one he'd told her not to open until she was alone. She'd opened it Christmas night, alone in her apartment after dropping Owen off, and she'd read it, and she'd put it in a drawer, and every few weeks she took it out and read it again. It was a drawing, done in Owen's handwriting, which was better than most 7-year-olds and still spectacularly uneven. 3 figures, a tall one, a medium one, and a small one, standing in a line. Under each figure, he'd written a name: Dad, Mom, me. Above the 3 of them, he'd drawn something that might have been a sky, or might have been clouds, or might have been, given Owen's interest in the subject, space with planets in it. Under the drawing, in the careful capitals he used for things that mattered, he'd written, "We are still a family. Different, but still." Victoria looked at the drawing and drank her coffee. Outside, Nashville was doing its Sunday morning thing. Quieter than usual, the city taking a breath before the week began again. She thought about what her therapist had asked her. What was she actually afraid of? What the main thing was? She thought she was starting to know. She put the drawing back in the drawer carefully and got up to refill her coffee. She had work to do. There was always work to do, and she had stopped apologizing for that. But she also had Owen on Wednesday, and she'd promised him she'd look up Jupiter's moons before then because he'd mentioned it on the phone and she'd said she would, and she wasn't going to be someone who said she would and then didn't. 79 moons. She'd look up all of them. That evening, Logan was in the garage when his phone buzzed. A text from Owen, who was at Kara's for dinner. Dad, did you know Jupiter has rings? Logan looked at this for a moment. I did know that. 3 seconds later, why didn't you tell me? You didn't ask about rings, you asked about moons. A pause. There are rings and moons. Correct. Another pause. This changes things. Logan sat in the garage with his phone and smiled. Not a big smile. The private kind. The kind James Carter had specialized in, absorbing good things quietly, in the dark, without needing an audience. He put the phone in his pocket and went back to work. Outside, Gerald was almost certainly somewhere in the dark, being a blue jay, which was what he did. The bird feeder was full. The telescope was in the corner of the garage, waiting for a clear night and a boy with a notebook and more questions than either of them would ever fully answer. The house was quiet. Not empty quiet. Just quiet. The difference mattered. This was what Logan Carter had. This house, this garage, this ordinary Saturday becoming Sunday in Tennessee, the stars overhead doing what they'd always done, and a kid somewhere across the city texting him about rings. This was what he'd protected. This was what had been worth protecting. Not the company, not the money, not the vindication of a courtroom reversal or the satisfaction of watching a scheme collapse. Those things had happened, and they'd mattered in their way, and now they were behind him, sediment at the bottom of a year that had changed the shape of his life. What remained was this: the rings and the moons, the granola bars, the hot chocolate getting cold, the way Owen said dad as a complete sentence when something important happened and he needed someone to hear it. Logan had heard it. He would keep hearing it. That was the whole story. Not the fortune, not the courtroom, not the quiet unraveling of a scheme that had underestimated him. Just a father, doing the thing that was in front of him, holding that part, trusting the rest was still there.